LoveLore Library. Chapter 421. Ji Yongchuan saw her blank eyes and immediately said, "Throw the talisman out." Wei Bai didn't think much and threw the talisman out. The red talisman suddenly stopped in mid-air and exploded with an unimaginable light. The strong exorcism power dispersed the green light of the moon. The group of ghosts that were holding Ji Yongchuan suddenly screamed. Ji Yongchuan didn't have it easy either, but he had a strong resistance and immediately broke free from the shackles of the ghost hands. He then stood up without hesitation and pulled Wei Bai to run outside. In the dark sky, only the red talisman shone like the sun. Finally, the two of them rushed out of the white line and were hit by the light of day. Wei Bai looked back and saw the graveyard in the dark was disintegrating. At the same time, the red talisman gradually lost its power. The scary ghosts looked up and stared at them under the light of day. Wei Bai said, "Slagstem, that's scary." The system said, "Don't be afraid, they will only come to you at night, you are safe now." Wei Bai, what should I do if I'm even more scared? Ji Yongchuan felt very uncomfortable under the light of day because he had lost a lot of power. But he couldn't enter the darkness now, because the ghosts in the darkness were waiting to devour him. He felt a burning sensation on his skin as it came into contact with the sun. Suddenly, a hand gently landed on his forehead. Ji Yongchuan looked up and saw Wei Bai's worried face. "Little brother, are you okay? You're hot." Of course he was hot after being steamed by the sun. He didn't know if it was an illusion, but her hand was cold. As a result, the burning sensation on his body faded quite a bit. He couldn't help but relax his body. As soon as he relaxed, his body collapsed. Ji Yongchuan's body went soft and fell into Wei Bai's arms. Wei Bai reached out to catch him and found that his body was warm. "Isn't the ghost cold? Why does it feel like he has a high fever?" Wei held a scalding hot ghost, her whole body stiff. The system said, "He fainted." Wei Bai, "Yeah, so ghosts can faint too, huh?" The system said, "The red talisman has lost its power." When Wei Bai heard this, she turned around and saw the eerie graveyard. The eerie night had returned. Then, it slowly eroded towards them. Wei Bai widened her eyes and erupted with an unimaginable strength, carrying Ji Yongchuan on her back. Then, she ran forward with all her might. There was a ghost. It was so scary. With great difficulty, Ji Yongchuan finally broke free from the trance of the scattered ghost aura, only to find that he was actually lying on Wei Bai's back. She struggled to walk forward step by step. Her small body dragged him along as she sweated profusely. He heard her panting. "Come on, we're going to be saved. There are so many ghosts and it's so scary." The Bai family was actually afraid of ghosts, how rare. Ji Yongchuan couldn't help but smile. Suddenly, his smile froze. He was actually in a good mood. He pursed his lips, furrowed his brows, and didn't say a word. He just lay on top of her, making it difficult for her to move forward step by step. With great difficulty, he finally saw a street not far away. They had completely arrived in the human world. Wei, on the other hand, was completely exhausted. A ghost was actually so heavy. Seeing that she really couldn't walk, Ji Yongchuan pretended to open his eyes. "Where are we?" Wei Bai turned around in surprise. "You're awake." Ji Yongchuan's handsome face was stunned for a moment, then finally revealed a joyful smile. "We're saved." Wei Bai put him down and shook her extremely sore hands without batting an eyelid. She also revealed a cute and innocent smile. "Yes, we're saved, little brother." The two of them laughed so innocently, without any shrewdness at all. The system, hee hee. The / next time when you open the bookshelf, you will see it. If you like. Chapter 422. So if you want a strategy, you can't hide it in the Taoist temple. Half a month had passed, Wei Wei Bai could only stake everything on this. Compared to ghosts, favorability is more important. When she returned to her original home, Wei Wei Bai looked at the candles in the house and the talisman papers scattered all over the floor. It was a mess. The remnants of the fight with Bai Wen were still there. Wei Wei Bai rolled up her sleeves and started to clean up the house. After cleaning for half a day, she finally wiped the sofa and chairs clean and pushed them back to their original positions. The sky was dark. Wei Wei Bai made herself some instant noodles to fill her stomach. As she ate, she looked at the half-finished house and suddenly felt lonely. Sigh, it's so good to have a nanny. Housework is not easy. After eating the instant noodles, she went to the kitchen to throw them away, then turned on the tap and started to wash her hands. A gust of cold wind blew past his neck. It was as if an ice-cold kiss had landed on her skin. Bai Weiwei was so agitated that she trembled. She looked back. There was nothing strange in the empty kitchen. Weiwei Bai walked out of the kitchen and went to take a shower. She filled the bathtub and started to take off her clothes. Halfway through taking off her clothes, she felt that something was wrong. She looked at the mirror for a long time. Even the system felt that something was wrong. What did you feel? Weiwei Bai was in a daze. I was so beautiful. System, Weiwei Bai said, so you can block yourself, I want to take a shower. The system was silent for a while, then said, who wants to look at you? After that, the system blocked her and decided to go to sleep. Weiwei Bai was just used to scolding the system, but after that, she realized that the system was really scared away. She sighed hypocritically. Your heart is so weak, it's lucky that you met a good host like me, or else you would be despised. She took off her clothes and stepped into the bathtub. In the mirror, a pale hand suddenly appeared and slowly touched her body in the mirror. In the mirror, a black ghostly figure slowly revealed a strange and eerie smile. Weiwei Bai was soaking in the bathtub. Her mind was still calculating what expression she should put on when she saw Ji Yongchuan. It was best to put on an expression of shock, happiness, guilt, pain, and sorrow. The lines had to be more tragic and emotional. Weiwei Bai reached out and rubbed her face, worried that her face couldn't hold so many different expressions. She suddenly felt that the water was cold. Did you forget to adjust the temperature? As Weiwei Bai soaked in the water, she did not know why her head was getting heavier and heavier. She was so sleepy that she could not open her eyes, but her mind was clear. Something was slowly approaching her. The water in the bathtub swayed. Who entered the bathtub? Weiwei Bai had a splitting headache. She wanted to open her eyes, but she couldn't. She called Slagstem a few times. Slagstem didn't respond either. Could it be that she was dreaming? An ice-cold hand slowly moved up her leg. Weiwei Bai shivered. She used all her strength, but she couldn't move. There was a huge force in the air that was pressing down on her. She opened her mouth to call for help, but a cold kiss sealed her voice. The cold water and the cold body pressed down on her. Weiwei Bai was so cold that her face turned pale. Her teeth were trembling. Suddenly, something cold and soft pried open her mouth and chewed on her. Rough, violent, and crazy. Weiwei Bai finally couldn't take it anymore. She used all her strength to push away the unknown object on her body. Chapter 423. But this action obviously put her in a worse situation. Eerie laughter sounded in her ears, and then Weiwei Bai was pressed into the water. Come accompany me, Weiwei Bai. That voice was shrill and mournful, and Wei Wei Bai's head hurt even more. She couldn't breathe, and her neck was being strangled, and her chest was about to explode. Trash System, Slag Stem, 004, Trash System. System Daddy, save me. Unfortunately, the system was sleeping and ignored its host's pitiful cry for help. So Bai Weiwei was tossed around until she hovered between life and death. She thought she was going to drown, and a cold hand would pull her out of the water again, kiss her, touch her, and do all kinds of indescribable things to her. Except for the last step. Everything was done. Then she was pressed into the water again, and after a while, she was fished up again and tormented. That night, she felt like she died a few times. Finally, she was able to open her eyes, and gasped for breath with her mouth open. Dizzily, she wanted to see what was molesting her. At first, she couldn't focus her eyes, and only saw a hazy white light, which was the light in the bathroom. Then, she saw a blurry face, and she guessed that it should be Ji Yongchuan. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a ghost that was in such a hurry, as if it hadn't seen a woman in 800 years. She tried her best, and planned to do it. Listen to me, you misunderstood me, my love. But before she could say anything, she saw Ji Yongchuan's withered face, which was filled with a greenish-gray aura of death, and his pupils were gone. Only the whites of his eyes were visible, and he slowly revealed a creepy smile. Wei Wei Bai, I won't let you go. Fine, there was no need to say anything. Wei Wei Bai was so scared that she fainted. The next day, the rooster crowed, and the system finally woke up. It removed the shield, and saw its host sitting on the bed with a haggard face. She was in a daze, and there were dark circles under her eyes, as if she was about to die. The system was shocked. I only left for one night, and you couldn't sleep because you missed me. Wei Wei Bai's lips twitched tiredly, but she couldn't say a word. The system was horrified. What was wrong with the host? Why wasn't the host rebuking it? This was too abnormal. Last night, I had an exceptionally ecstatic night. Wei Wei Bai suddenly said sinisterly. System. The male lead is here. Wei Wei Bai, I want to apply for a new male lead. The system said, don't do Dream of the Red Chamber. Wei Wei Bai, I want to apply for a new male lead. The system said, hang in there, host. I know it's tough for you in this plane, but who doesn't? We're all just little screws trying to make a living. We'll get through it soon. Wei Wei Bai was in despair. Ji Yongchuan is too ugly now. I can't take it anymore. Wei Wei Bai hugged her head and shouted, it's so ugly. I feel so hopeless. Wei Wei Bai threw a tantrum, I don't care. Change the male lead, change the male lead. She repeated this over and over again. The system silently plugged in its earplugs, refusing to see the host who only had the IQ of a fertilized egg. After Bai Weiwei finished venting her grievances, she finally returned to normal. She knew that Ji Yongchuan was definitely spying on her in the room, so she immediately got into character. She silently got up and wore her clothes. When she saw the ambiguous marks on her body, she started crying. She cried weakly and helplessly. Then she reached out and wiped her face. She turned around and rummaged through the cabinets to look for something. She found a lot of gathering treasures and placed them on the table. She set up the incense burner, lit the incense, and stared at it blankly. In the mirror behind her, a tall figure strangely appeared. He had black hair and a black robe. His face was abnormally pale and his eyes were terrifyingly dark. He saw her staring blankly at the offering table. Suddenly, he heard her sadly talking to herself. Is that you? Little brother. The. Chapter 424. She couldn't explain herself. Wei Wei Bai's face turned green from his cold fingers, and she felt like her chest was about to explode. She looked at Ji Yongchuan blankly. His long hair was messy, and his ugly face was filled with resentment. He looked like a malicious ghost coming to claim her life. Wei Wei Bai didn't say anything, so she could only use her eyes. Her eyes were filled with sadness and guilt, without a trace of unwillingness or resentment. She used all her strength to slowly reach out, and her fingers gently touched his ugly face. Without a trace of disdain. Her fingertips gently caressed him. It was as if she was treating her most precious thing. Then she forced a smile and silently said, "I'm sorry, little brother." Ji Yongchuan's fingers loosened, but he didn't let go. Wei Wei Bai had already closed her eyes, and her breathing calmed down, just like a dead person. After an unknown amount of time, Ji Yongchuan's ghost face twisted in pain, and he slowly let go of his hand. Wei Wei Bai's body softly fell, and silently leaned on his arm. The surrounding darkness became thicker, and only the two of them were snuggled up to each other. Ji Yongchuan's face began to change, his face turned white, and his eyes returned to normal, but they were too dark. In a short while, he had already returned to his handsome human appearance. A ghost king's original appearance was like this. That ugly appearance just now was because he knew that she was afraid of ugly ghosts, so he deliberately scared her. Her breathing was still intermittent, as if she was in pain. Ji Yongchuan's eyes were dyed with a trace of cold malice, and his fingernails grew longer. Just kill her. This thought kept reverberating in his mind. His return this time was because of this thought that supported him. The obsession was ingrained in his bones, and couldn't be changed. His fingernails touched her chest, and under his fingernails, her trembling heartbeat was filled with warm vitality. If she died and became a resentful ghost, she would definitely hate him. Ji Yongchuan's face showed signs of struggle, and his sharp fingernails slowly disappeared. In the end, his hands hugged her. He buried his head deep into her chest, and he sneered in pain. "Don't lie to me, I won't believe you." Wei Wei Bai felt like she was boiling. His high fever did not subside, and even his breathing was hot. She complained to the system, "Sigh, this job is so hard. I'm being exploited like a cow or a horse. It's so torturous that I can't earn any money. Look at me now, I'm so hot that I'm about to puff up." The system said, "Hot, at least it proves that you're still alive." Wei Wei Bai, who had fainted from the heat, thought about it and said happily, "That's right, I'm still alive." System, poor child, you've been burned silly. Wei Wei Bai's fever did not subside. In her coma, she kept talking nonsense. An ice-cold hand gently covered her forehead. A satisfied smile appeared on her rosy face. It was like a cat that was content with its life. That hand hesitated for a moment before cruelly moving away. He seemed to want her to burn her brain. However, Wei Wei Bai frowned. She immediately frowned bitterly and waved her hands randomly. He seemed to be looking for something. In the air, there was a helpless and cold sigh. Then, that ghostly hand gently approached her again. She caught hold of his hand and placed it on her face. Then, she let out a comfortable murmur and rubbed against his palm very cutely. The soft warmth rubbed against his ice-cold skin, giving him a shivering feeling. Ji Yongchuan's dark eyes trembled slightly. He looked at her silently. A thick ghostly aura filled the room. Gradually, the ghostly aura settled and disappeared from the ground. The sunlight from outside the window could finally penetrate. Traces of light fell on the face of the girl in his arms. She was quiet and beautiful. The collect button below to record this reading record. Chapter 425. Ji Yongchuan let go of her and stood up, his black figure seemed lonely. He looked at her with a pale face. It doesn't matter if you lie to me, you can't escape me anyway. After saying that, he staggered away. Halfway through, he remembered. The room was filled with ghostly air, it was very cold and harmful to the human body. She was not wearing any clothes, it would be very uncomfortable to curl up there. She might get sick. Ji Yongchuan could not move his feet, he reached out to wipe away the tears on his face. Just as he was about to turn around and help her put on her clothes. Stumbling footsteps came from behind, he turned around just in time to catch a warm body. Then she hugged him tightly, she buried her head in his chest. A cry of despair sounded, I like you, I can't lie to myself, I just like you, I can even be a sacrifice, if you don't want me, just kill me, how can I not like you? His heart was about to explode from her words. His mind was blank. Ji Yongchuan felt suffocated for the first time, he did not need to breathe to live. But he felt the pain of suffocation. After the great sorrow, the great joy tore him to pieces. He felt as if his cold walls had been shattered, and cracks had appeared on the cold expression that he had been forcing himself to maintain. Finally, he hugged her and whispered in her ear, me too, I like you, ding, the male lead's favorability is at 70. The system's melancholy deepened, it took out a handful of popcorn. After eating a few, it could not help but sigh, what a pair of crazy people. It gave up on its pretentious host and the brainless male lead. Wei Wei Bai suddenly said, wait, there are only 3 days left. The system said, you slept for a few days, when you woke up, there were only 3 days left. Wei Wei Bai said, that's too rushed. The system was expressionless, your acting is unparalleled, you are the only one in the world, there is nothing you can't do. Wei Wei Bai said, hee hee, that's true. The system, you don't have to believe polite words, these are polite words. Ji Yongchuan picked up the clothes on the ground one by one and helped her put them back on. Wei Wei Bai sat quietly. After putting on his clothes, he buttoned up the best button and suddenly stopped in his tracks. After pausing for a while, Ji Yongchuan suddenly hugged her and buried his head in her shoulder. This action was fragile and dependent. Wei Wei, hurry up and run. Wei Wei Bai was genuinely confused this time. Run. Ghost Qi filled Ji Yongchuan's black eyes. His expression turned ferocious for a moment, but it was soon replaced by gentleness, making him look exceptionally terrifying. I'll open the door later and then open the passage to the outside world. Don't look back. Run straight to the human world. When he said this, the veins on his neck bulged. That familiar darkness was about to take over his body again. His obsession was too deep, so deep that he became a monster. Even he couldn't control himself. Suddenly, he felt something gentle fall on his hair. It was Wei Wei Bai's kiss. She lowered her head and kissed his hair with incomparable gentleness. Ji Yongchuan, I won't go. Even if I die, I won't leave you. Ji Yongchuan was angry and anxious. You should leave. I'm no longer your little big brother. I came out of the primal chaos land a second time and my obsession has turned into a demon. I will become an uncontrollable monster and kill you. When a ghost was stubborn to the bone, they would become resentful ghosts. He was now a resentful ghost. He was only relying on his love for her to hold on to a trace of clarity. Wei Wei Bai was silent for a moment before saying affectionately, what's so good about humans and ghosts walking different paths? If you kill me, we can make a ghost mandarin duck. Ji Yongchuan's body trembled. He buried his face in her shoulder and didn't make a sound. But the affection increased. Ding, the affection has increased to 75. Wei Wei Bai revealed a smile and was about to continue saying more affectionate words. He suddenly said in a sinister voice, really? Wei Wei Bai, you're willing to be a ghost mandarin duck with me? Wei Wei Bai opened her mouth and was about to shamelessly say, yes, he had already raised his head. His eyes were only white and filled with red veins. His face was green and ugly as he revealed a strange and crazy smile. Me too. Every second, I crazily want to kill you and bind your soul to my side. Wei Wei Bai, what should she do if the target of the attack acts up? Chapter 426. Ji Yongchuan's bloodshot eyes had a strange madness in them. He chuckled, and the ghostly aura around him started to swirl. You can only leave the Bai family after I kill you. Baiwen won't be able to make you leave me. Wei Wei Bai was always proud of her ability to lie to people and flirt with ghosts, but she was stuck for a moment. She forced a constipated expression and said, "Little brother, I won't leave you." Suddenly, she felt a chill in front of her chest. Ji Yongchuan's fingernails had dug into her chest. Wei Wei Bai was silent for a moment, and finally hugged the system and cried. Tongzi, it's so scary. I can't hold on any longer. The system said earnestly, look at yourself. You'll know what retribution is after doing so many bad things. I told you not to be so heartless that even ghosts won't let you go. If you don't listen, what can I do as your father? Tell me. Wei Wei Bai said, give me a few talismans to drive the ghosts away. This face is too ugly. The system said, I'll teach you a way, and you won't be afraid of ghosts anymore. Wei Wei Bai couldn't wait, please tell me. The system said, if you do a little apple dance, the ghosts might like it and not want to kill you. Ha 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 ha. Wei Wei Bai was speechless, she wanted to cut the system into 8 pieces. No matter how scared she was, Wei Wei Bai still insisted on maintaining her precarious persona. She looked at him sadly, and wanted to reach out and hold his face. But when she saw the color on his face, and his eyes that were as scary as those in horror movies, she decided to go all out. Wei Wei Bai reached out and slapped his face. Then, she hugged his face and said in a trembling voice, little brother, I love you. If you want to kill me, just kill me. His fingernails paused for a moment, and his stiff face seemed to be struggling and twisting. Wei Wei Bai was so scared that she wanted to cry. It was too fucking ugly. Tears welled up in her eyes, and her teeth trembled as she continued to hold on. We will be together forever. You will become a resentful ghost, and I will be the resentful ghost's wife, forever and ever. Damn it. Was there a mosaic on Ji Yongchuan's face? She would definitely be able to show off her affection. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 80. How could this increase favorability points? Wei Wei Bai was both scared and pleasantly surprised. For the sake of the favorable impression points, she didn't mind his funny face. The system suddenly said, life subsistence allowance activated. Wei Wei Bai, my HP. No, what for? As soon as she finished speaking, Ji Yongchuan kissed her lips. After his mutation, his lips were cold and tasteless. They were not soft, but hard. She stared blankly at his deathly pale ghost eyes. She was scared witless. And when his fingernails pierced through her chest and pierced into her heart, because his fingers trembled violently, they brushed past the side of her heart. Just a little bit more and it would have pierced through her heart. Ji Yongchuan was still kissing her. His face was struggling, but it was controlled by an even more terrifying possessiveness. If he killed her, he would be able to bind her here forever. She would forever be his. She said that she wanted to be his wife. However, in his mind, an intense thought sprang forth. You hurt her, you hurt her. This thought was like a sharp blade piercing through his heart. A trace of clarity appeared in Ji Yongchuan's eyes. He suddenly couldn't control his body from trembling violently. Wei Wei Bai couldn't move. She just sat there in a daze. Ji Yongchuan also pulled back his fingernails. Blood immediately gushed out from her chest. Slash. Chapter 427. Ji Yongchuan's fingers were holding the net. They were all burnt, but he didn't seem to feel any pain. He could only look at her with eyes wide open. He shouted helplessly, "Come back, we have other ways. Wei Wei, come back." The water had already reached her chest. She could barely stand. Her whole body was covered in ice. She looked very pitiful. But Wei Wei Bai was still smiling with difficulty. She didn't answer and just stood in the Huangshuan River. And the flower on her forehead was only left with faint petals. Those ghost hands were slowly approaching her. Wei Wei Bai was as calm as the wind. This mosaic function is not bad. To obtain this last bit of favorability, she used 5 days of her life points to purchase the one-button mosaic function from Patong. Although it could only last for 12 hours. But it was enough. Otherwise, if she saw so many ghosts, she would be so scared that her character setting would collapse at any moment. The mosaic function was complete. With one press, the dog head served. Looking up, those ghost hands, ghosts and so on turned into huskies sticking out their tongues. There were also cabbage heads, beautiful girls, cute little rabbits and other mosaic styles to choose from. She pressed a button and the ghosts turned into beautiful girls. With another press, they were all cabbage heads. Haha, fun. The system really wanted to strangle her. Be serious, you still have 10 points of affection left. Wei Wei Bai just remembered. That's right, the mission was not completed. She immediately adjusted her state and looked affectionately at Ji Yongchuan on the shore. She looked like she was in a daze from the cold and softly called, "Little brother." Ji Yongchuan looked at her crazily, "I'm here, come back, okay, okay." Every word was full of desperate pleading. At this time, he didn't have any dignity. He could only lie on the ground and stretch his scarred hand out of the net, closer to her. Closer, ding, the male lead's affection is at 95. Wei Wei Bai seemed like she wanted to open her mouth and say yes, but she could only sigh and then stand helplessly in the Huangshuan River. Those ghosts rushed over. They surrounded her. She would be eaten and disappear completely. Ji Yongchuan's mind went blank for a moment. After overdrawing all of his strength, he finally used his tattered body to tear through the net and roll out. He didn't care about the state of his body, which was in the process of dissipating ghost chi, and staggered into the forgetful river. But there were too many ghosts in the river, he couldn't see where she was. Ji Yongchuan stretched out his hand to push the ghosts away, but when he pushed them away one by one, they surged forward again. It was endless. In a trance, he heard Wei Wei Bai's voice. "Little brother." Ji Yongchuan was shocked. "I'm here." He wanted to shout loudly, but he found that his neck had been broken by the net. Black ghost energy was coming out of his neck, and he couldn't speak at all. "Little brother." The sound became softer and softer. "I'm here." However, Ji Yongchuan was unable to answer her. He could only desperately search for her. In the river of forgetfulness, a tattered lonely soul squeezed its way into the group of ghosts in the middle of the river. He looked miserable and pitiful. Suddenly, he saw a pale hand among the ghosts. The wrist was slender, and there was a touch of pink on the fingertips. It was her hand. Ji Yongchuan grabbed the hand tightly and shouted silently, "Wei Wei, I'm here." Wei Wei Bai was drowned by ghosts. She looked at a pile of dog heads, but the ghosts couldn't tear her body. She spent 2 days of her life points to buy a substitute and let the substitute sacrifice for her. Anyway, the effect was about the same. Otherwise, the horrible experience of being eaten by ghosts, even if these ghosts were pixelated into dog heads, it was still scary to be eaten by dogs. Slash. Chapter 428. Chincho. Yi Yuxuan's expression was cramping. Why did she have such an expression? She had been expressionless for too long. Did she finally get a facial spasm? Chincho said cautiously, "Have you become a believer recently?" Her soul jumped out. The next sentence wouldn't be God creating the world, right? Yi Yuxuan quietly lowered her head, but her dark eyes stared at the hospital. I know what her name is. Chincho couldn't react for a moment. Who? Yi Yuxuan whispered, Wei Wei Bai. These words were lightly bitten on her lips, carrying a trace of tenderness and deep affection. I saw it. Her name is clearly written on the 3 live stone. On the 3 life stone, Ji Yongchuan's and Wei Wei Bai's names covered the entire stone, densely packed. It was the man in the dream who used his finger to write stroke by stroke. Every word was bloody, crazy, and sorrowful. A blood-red fog pervaded the air, and cold ghost energy wrapped around the entire bridge of helplessness. When the ghosts crossed the bridge, they trembled. On the 3 live stone, bloody strokes covered the entire greenish-gray stone. After years, the stone had almost turned blood-brown. Mengpo weighed the amount of Mengpo's soup with a spoon. It's not enough again. You guys line up. These words made all the ghosts in the line angry and dissatisfied. But Mengpo's words made all the ghosts silent. Mengpo's soup was taken away by the Ghost King. I can't do anything but boil it day and night. A new ghost was puzzled. Why does the Ghost King need so much Mengpo's soup? Mengpo raised her old eyes and looked at the river of forgetfulness. It said that if you don't reincarnate and don't reincarnate, you can exchange a lifetime of love for an infatuated ghost. In the blood-red river, a tall figure stood in the middle. A blood-red robe fluttered with the river. Mengpo turned back. But who can endure 1,000 years of torment in the river of forgetfulness? So they could only drink Mengpo's soup over and over again. He just wanted to forget about that woman for a second, to have a moment of peace. Little brother, in the river, her smile was bright and lovely as she reached out to hold his hand. Ji Yongchuan stupidly reached out his hand, but all he touched was the ice-cold river water. Her face was shattered, and only her fragmented body was left. He stared blankly. The intense pain came from his limbs and bones. Every bone in his body was being tormented by the water of the forgetfulness river. The river was like a mirror projector. She kept showing him her best side. Once again, he used the cruelest method to shatter it before his eyes. Ji Yongchuan did not know how many years he had spent on the river of forgetfulness. Back then, he had killed all the ghosts that had feasted on her. To this day, the rivers of hell are red. Then, he used the bones of hell, the accumulated resentment of all the ghosts, and the most terrifying method of summoning, but he still couldn't summon the soul he wanted. Later on, he tried all kinds of methods. They couldn't find her. He shouldn't have been unable to find it. Back then, he did not devour her soul. The reason why he could become a ghost king was because he had absorbed enough ghost energy. That was why her soul hadn't dissipated. Her soul should still be around. He didn't see her reincarnate, he didn't see her cross the bridge of helplessness, he didn't see her drink Mengpo's soup. He kept looking for those who had reincarnated in the mirror of the human world. He kept looking for his familiar back among those new ghosts. He had been disappointed too many times, to the point of despair. Ji Yongchuan chose the most hopeless path. Like those useless ghosts, he kept soaking in the water of the river of forgetfulness. It was said that soaking for 1,000 years could be exchanged for a lifetime of love. Even if it was a lifetime of 100 years, as long as they could be together, he would be willing to soak in this river for 10,000 years. /full text download Chapter 430. Baiwen smiled faintly, drank the soup in his hand indifferently, and then went to reincarnate. Leaving Ji Yongchuan in the ghost world, he continued to search for that non-existent soul. He didn't know how long he had been searching, but when he suddenly fell into the Wangchuan River one day, a familiar feeling attacked his heart. He seemed to have been searching like this all along. Not only in this life, but in many, many lives. He had been waiting for her, looking for her all along. He found despair and madness, dying a horrible death in every life, lonely and paranoid. New and old ghosts came and went on the bridge of helplessness, and Mengpa quietly served soup to these ghosts. Her soup could make any ghost forget this life and previous life. Only it didn't work on him. She looked over and saw a red robe still hanging on the 3 live stone. And the master had disappeared. After he fell into the Wangchuan River, no ghost saw him again. Mengpa belatedly remembered that the Ghost King had been soaking in the Wangchuan River for thousands of years. His soul had scattered. It was unknown who sighed faintly. On the 3 life stone, their names, with bloody affection, still existed. After Qin Qiu heard this, his brain crashed for a while. And then he said, "This is what it means to dream of what you think of in the day. You like Wei Wei Bai, so you dream of her name. Isn't this a very normal thing?" Yi Yuxuan's eyes were tired. That dream almost exhausted all his strength. After waking up, it was as if he had completely experienced the process of his soul scattering. That thick sadness and madness still remained in his body. And he found that even though it was so painful, he still couldn't understand 1% of the true feelings of the man in the dream. Yi Yuxuan had a strange feeling, as if he broke some barrier. He might be crushed by the madness and misery of every dream. I have a vague guess. What if those dreams were 3 lives and 3 lives of me with her? Yi Yuxuan lowered his thick eyelashes, and under his half-closed eyelids, only a faint breathtaking light could be seen. Qin Qiu's face was dull. 3 lives and 3 lives, what a weirdo. But as a normal person, he must resist the urge to complain. Maybe, Qin Qiu felt that such an awkward, such a childish conversation, was there really no problem? His conversation style with Yi Yuxuan. "Uncle Qin, I have a headache recently. It's probably caused by the lack of blood supply to the brain after staying up late for 3 days and 3 nights. Give me some vitamins." Blah 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 blah. Yi Yuxuan's expression was incomparably paralyzed. "You wasted 5 minutes of my time. If you waste another minute, I won't fund your hospital." This was their normal conversational style. The style of his conversation with Yi Yuxuan changed. Qin Qiu said, Good. Yi, I have a child with her. I have 3 lives and 3 lives with her. How can you say such shameful lines?" What kind of tragic things had happened to their conversation that caused it to become so crooked? Yi Yuxuan was still in the middle of his awkward lines. "I even suspect that she will leave me in this life, and I don't know where she went. Life after life, she left him. There was never an exception. //. Chapter 431. Qin Qiu said weakly, No. Wei Wei is still in the hospital." Suddenly, he thought of something and said happily, "When I came back from the hospital, I heard Wei Wei Bai say that she has feelings for you." Yi Yuxuan didn't react. Just when Qin Qiu thought that he would be paralyzed. Suddenly, Yi Yuxuan's thin lips opened slightly. "What did you say?" Qin Qiu was stunned. "Wei Wei Bai said that she has feelings for you." Yi Yuxuan asked very calmly, "How special?" Qin Qiu said, "Usually, when a woman says that she has feelings for a man, it means that she likes him." Yi Yuxuan's eyelashes trembled slightly, and the light in his eyes intensified. His expression was very calm, but his fingers couldn't help but clench. This was excitement, this feeling was excitement. Yi Yuxuan suddenly stood up and walked towards the hospital with his long legs. Meanwhile, matchmaker Chiu was baffled. Why did she leave just like that? How rude. Bai Weiwei tried every possible way to appease her old man. Don't cancel the engagement first. After observing Yi Yuxuan for a while, she would make plans. She drank some soup and warmed her hands and feet. Finally, she felt that she could move freely. Bai Changyan saw that his precious daughter had woken up. Even though her body was still weak, her spirit was especially good. He said happily, "When you're better, we still need you to make decisions about the company." He had already told her about Bai Yaoyao's situation with a sad expression. After Bai Yaoyao was seriously injured, she was taken away by someone. Weiwei Bai thought that Enlu took her away. However, she was exhausted now. She had to deal with her trash sister when she had more time in the future. Weiwei Bai nodded naturally. Yes, I will reorganize the company. Without her, those old fogies might come back to control the company again. Suddenly, the system reminded her, Yi Yuxuan is here. Bai Weiwei was frightened, and her whole body entered a super alert state. She said to Bai Changyan, "Dad, I'm going out for a while." Bai Changyan's face was full of love. "All right, go and rest." Weiwei Bai immediately walked out, and the system notified, 30 meters away from you, 20 meters, 10 meters, just around the corner, the energy feedback is starting. Weiwei Bai suddenly stopped in her tracks. In front, Yi Yuxuan's footsteps were slightly hurried as he walked over. His slender legs moved gracefully and calmly. Under his black hair, his handsome face was simply eye-catching. His face was calm, and he had a natural noble charm. Even Weiwei Bai was dazzled for a moment. Of course, it was only for a moment. She was already prepared to run because she couldn't think of a big move to provoke Yi Yuxuan. He had kissed her, taken off her clothes, and was just short of sleeping with her. Even if he wanted to sleep now, this place was too difficult. So Weiwei Bai gave up on this shameless decision. But when Yi Yuxuan was less than a meter away from her, the system was surprisingly silent. Not deducting her precious life points. Or was it that their similar auras were no longer similar? The system then spoke, Yi Yuxuan is very excited now, and it's because of you, so both of your auras are equal. If you don't deduct your life points, you won't get any benefits. Weiwei Bai was at a loss. What did she do to make Yi Yuxuan so excited? Under the soft light, in the white corridor, Yi Yuxuan looked up and saw that she was not far away. She was wearing a hospital gown, and her thin body was a little weak. It was as if she sensed his arrival. Her gentle face turned slightly, and there was a trace of confusion in her clear eyes. Yi Yuxuan stopped in his tracks. His indifferent expression finally had a ripple. Then Weiwei Bai heard his calm and hoarse voice. I heard that you like me. / crossover system, Adonis, come over here. Chapter 432. I heard that you like me. Weiwei Bai was stunned. Who said that? The system said, excitement is rising. Increase the stimulation. I'm ready to fish for as long as I can. Weiwei Bai rolled up her sleeves and wanted to go all out. Who cared who said it? He was a good person and should be rewarded. She took a deep breath and looked up. She smiled affectionately and was about to say, yes. Yi Yuxuan rushed up to her, grabbed her arm and pushed her against the wall. Cabidon. Weiwei Bai's smile froze. Her eyes flashed with surprise. He had already lowered his head. A few strands of black hair fell to his eyes, giving off a sense of evil. Tell me the truth. Her expression changed too slowly. She was holding her breath, blushing and smiling. They were all forced. He did not like it. Wei Wei Bai's lips trembled. She looked up calmly. She said honestly, "Let go of me." Bai Weiwei felt as if Yi Yuxuan's entire body was shrouded over her. He grabbed her shoulder and held the wall beside her ear with his other hand. This posture was especially oppressive. She did not like it. Yi Yuxuan's expression was as calm as usual. When he heard her words, his breathing became erratic. His grip tightened. His eyelashes fluttered. His tone became oppressive. "You like me?" Was this a question? Or a statement? Wei Wei Bai seriously thought about her performance. Was it not skillful enough? Or was her expression too outdated? She blinked and smiled shyly. Then she looked away and did not say anything. He wanted to refuse but gave up. He wanted to speak but stopped. She was natural and not pretentious. Yi Yuxuan was expressionless. "Is it hard to answer?" "I'll answer for you." Wei Wei Bai smiled shyly. Could someone answer for her whether she liked it or not? Yi Yuxuan's incomparably indifferent expression did not change in the slightest. Only a pair of deep eyes stared fixedly at her. Then he whispered, "You forced a kiss on me." "Wei Wei Bai, I have nothing to say." His eyes flickered and his expression changed slightly. "You even took off your clothes for me to see." "Wei Wei Bai, that makes sense." Yi Yuxuan paused for a few seconds and said in a low voice, "But you don't like me." Bai Weiwei looked up. Her eyes were watery, with a few traces of hazy mist, and a hint of affection. "No, I actually like you very much." A slender index finger pressed against her soft lips. Wei Wei Bai's eyelashes fluttered. She could clearly see Yi Yuxuan's deep eyes. There was a hint of heat in them. His voice was slightly hoarse, and his words were restrained with indifference. "No, you don't like it." She was silent for a moment and seemed a little annoyed. She frowned slightly and could not help but bite her lips lightly. Her lips darkened a little. Her eyes, however, were still extremely bright, as if she was thinking of something that no one knew about. Yi Yuxuan's gaze softened. He was restrained and cold. Suddenly, Wei Wei Bai tiptoed. Yi Yuxuan was stunned. He saw the indifference in her eyes clearly, but he did not avoid it. It was a light kiss, like a dream, with her delicate scent on his lips. Yi Yuxuan only heard a thump in his heart, as if something had smashed it heavily. His lips trembled, but he did not have time to taste anything deeper. She moved away from his lips again. Her eyes were slightly red, and there was a seductive smile at the corner of her mouth. Yi Yuxuan looked at her with a tense expression and his breathing became heavy. Wei Wei Bai said softly beside his lips, "If this doesn't count as liking, then what do you think is liking?" Chapter 433. Her breathing as she spoke intertwined with his breathing, forming a blurred sense of seduction. But he still had the same expression. He looked at her coldly and condescendingly. Only his hand that was supporting the wall firmly clasped the wall. His eyes darkened a little. Wei Wei Bai was a little scared by his gaze and knocked on the system. "Is the excitement level high?" The system held the net expressionlessly. "No, I have never seen a person who can maintain the same level of excitement and then not fluctuate. This is not like a human, it's like a machine." Wei Wei Bai. "I think he's like a robot too." She had felt it before, but now it was barely fluctuating. It was also very abnormal. Wei Wei Bai was a little depressed. What was a robot strategy? Waiting online, urgent. She thought for a while and tried to reach out her hand, softly hugging his waist. The man's waist was surprisingly strong. Because he was wearing a suit, it was a little hard to tell if there was any excess fat. Wei Wei Bai instinctively pinched it. It was hard. Yi Yuxuan was stiff in the same position, but his breathing was heavier, as if he was enduring something. His excitement should be rising, Bai Weiwei thought blankly. Or should it go further? She gathered her courage and hugged his waist with her fingers. She shamelessly rubbed her whole body into his arms, her face on his chest, and squeezed out a smile. I really like you. Otherwise, why would I kiss and hug you? After so many worlds, she had already become a super experienced driver. She hugged and kissed when she wanted to. She was not soft at all. Yi Yuxuan was silent. Suddenly, she felt the body of the man she was hugging relax, as if he had accepted his fate. Then a series of life points notifications came. Remaining life points, 42 days, 43 days, 44 days. Wei Wei Bai wished she could turn into a giant octopus glue and stick to him fiercely. Life points were an ATM machine. Hugging for a minute was more than the reward of doing work in 10 worlds. 47 days, 55 days. Why wasn't there a transition in 55 days? Wei Wei Bai was shocked by the increase. Then, before she could figure it out, Tang Yamo said she was pushed away by Yi Yuxuan. Her hands were held high above her head by him. Wei Wei Bai raised her head and saw that his dark eyes were terrifyingly deep. There was a cold sharpness in them that seemed to be choosing people to devour. Are you dreaming? Wei Wei Bai was at a loss. Dream? His voice lowered. I don't like dreams, but you do. What did she like? Wei Wei Bai was about to ask when he tightened his grip on her wrists, causing her to struggle uncontrollably. His other hand firmly clasped her chin, leaned over, thin lips coldly said, In the future, you are not allowed to like anyone, just look at me. These words were cold and domineering. All the men in her dreams could have her love. He only felt a strange and unbearable feeling rising in his chest, as if he was being torn apart. Maybe it was jealousy, maybe it was. In any case, it was an emotion that he had never experienced before, causing him to become ugly and impulsive. For the first time, Wei Wei Bai wanted to avoid a man's gaze. It was cold and restrained, as if there was a terrifying darkness curling up, causing people to instinctively feel afraid. She couldn't retreat, so she could only turn her face. The curve of her neck was weak and pale, with a trace of imperceptible resistance. Yi Yuxuan only felt that the string in his heart had snapped. He suddenly released the hand that was clasping her chin. Wei Wei Bai didn't hear the increase in excitement. He also clasped her hand, not reacting at all. She looked at him tentatively and hesitantly. Chapter 434. But she saw him loosening the tie on his collar with one hand, revealing his sexy Adam's apple. When his fingers slid over his Adam's apple, there was a trace of lust. His next action was suddenly fierce. He held the back of her head and grabbed her arm with one hand. Then, he pulled her soft body into his embrace. Then he lowered his head, captured her lips, and kissed her fiercely. He roughly pried open her lips and tongue, and domineeringly and forcefully sucked her breath. This kiss was like a storm, with a desperate desire to destroy, forcing her to be indifferent. Wei Wei Bai was shocked by his terrible attack. She reflexively wanted to struggle, but found that his embrace was even more confining. Not to mention struggling, she couldn't even lift her hand. Her breath was taken away, and her breath was messily intertwined with another man's strong breath. Wei Wei Bai's vision blurred, and her head spun. Only his kiss occupied all her thoughts. Wet, greedy, deep, she even felt that the skin that was touching his body was so hot that it was about to burn. Her heart suddenly hurt. And the favorability notifications continued. 65 days, 70 days, she was in pain and excited, and her heart was beating fast. She felt like she was going to die. Wei Wei Bai's hand grabbed his clothes fiercely, and her eyes lost focus. In a blur, she only saw Yi Yuxuan's deep eyes, with a burning fire, as if to burn her. She softened. The system's voice sounded. Detected that there is a problem with the host's life. The newbie gift package is activated, and you have received 3 days of vegetative life. Wei Wei Bai's heart disease relapsed. Yi Yuxuan let go of her, and found that her face was covered in sweat, her face was pale, and her eyes were closed. She leaned softly in his arms. He half hugged her, pursed his lips, looked at her for half a second, and suddenly put his hand on her chest. You should like me now. Her heartbeat sped up for him. Suddenly, someone rushed out from the corner, and Qin Qiu shouted crazily, "My big brother, she has a heart attack, quick, quick, send her to the emergency room." Yi Yuxuan's eyes flashed with a trace of confusion. The door next door opened and Bai Changyan frowned as he poked his head out. Who's having a heart attack? His daughter had a heart attack, so he was very sensitive when he heard about it. Qin Qiu's footsteps paused, and his face changed greatly. Bai Changyan also felt that something was wrong and turned his head to look. He saw that Yi Yuxuan's breathing was chaotic. His collar was open, and his tie was hanging loosely. He looked like a beast in human clothing. In his arms, Wei Wei Bai was leaning on him softly with her head tilted to one side. Bai Changyan looked at the beast's hand that was still on his daughter's chest. The scene was silent for a while. Matchmaker Qin and Mr. Bai were silent for 2 seconds. Yi Yuxuan had already reacted quickly. He carried Bai Weiwei and quickly ran in the direction of the emergency room. Qin Qiu reached out his hand. Don't leave me behind. The next moment, Old Man Bai grabbed Qin Qiu's neck. Quick, my daughter was taken away by a beast, I want to call the police to arrest him. The police were useless. Qin Qiu almost fainted. Fortunately, Bai Changyan also regained his senses and immediately let go of his hand. Then the 2 people staggered and chased after them. They ran to the emergency room. They were told that Yi Yuxuan and Wei Wei Bai were in the emergency room. Bai Changyan also wanted to go in. Several nurses and doctors stopped him. You can't go in if you're not a patient. You'll disturb the emergency treatment. Bai Changyan was indignant. How can that dirty and shameless bastard Yi Yuxuan go in? My daughter is still in his hands. Chapter 435. A nurse said, he needs first aid too. Bai Changyan asked, which part of him needs first aid? The nurse was silent for a while before saying, he said that his heart needs first aid. Both Bai Changyan and Qin Qiu were confused. The nurse continued, Mr. Yi said that because he was too excited, his adrenaline secretion increased, dopamine surged, and other hormones increased. He needs to stay by Miss Bai's side to stabilize his condition. Old Father Bai was even more confused. What kind of illness is this? Qin Qiu. Love disease. Wei Wei Bai clutched her chest. It was heavy and painful. She did not expect that she would have a heart attack after being kissed. Tongzi, I feel like I'm going to die. The system said, you can still live. Let me count, 82 days. Wei Wei Bai, 82 days. The system said, that's the life points I got from Yi Yuxuan. Wei Wei Bai was excited, I can't believe I got so much, I have so much life points now. The system said, if you weren't so excited and had a heart attack, I would have gotten you 100 days. Wei Wei Bai said, I'm so excited because I was kissed. Clearly, I should be feeling calm. The system said, you can't turn on the emotion blocker in reality, it would be weird if you weren't excited. Wei Wei Bai communicated with the system for a while before falling asleep again. After some time, she finally woke up. The bright light was above her head. She rubbed her temples. It hurt, her brain felt like it was hit by a hammer. She forced herself to open her sore eyes. Her eyes were out of focus for a while before she could see clearly. There was another man sleeping quietly on a white pillow. His breathing was steady, his black hair covered half of his face, and his beautiful and delicate jawline was faintly visible. Most of the blanket was outside the bed. Only a corner of the blanket was left, covering his butt. Wei Wei Bai forced herself to sit up and saw the man's white and strong back and thin and strong waist. She was silent for a moment before lowering her head. Sure enough, she saw that she was lying naked beside him. Wei Wei Bai carefully reached out, grabbed the blanket on his butt, and slowly moved it to her body. Just as she covered her body with the blanket, someone grabbed her wrist. Wei Wei Bai's fingers trembled. She saw that the man who had been sleeping on his stomach had turned to his side. However, his hand was still gripping her wrist tightly, refusing to let go. He didn't seem to have woken up yet. His thick eyelashes trembled as he opened his sleepy eyes. Wei Wei Bai was stunned. Morning. He seemed to be startled. The drowsiness in his eyes was swept away, and he sharply woke up. Who are you? Wei Wei Bai, she also wants to know who she is. However, the system seemed to have disconnected and didn't say anything. He had just thought of that. The system's voice rang out. This mission is to obtain Lu Zixi love. Target, Lu Zixi. Progress, 0, time, 6 months. Lu Zixi raised his head and looked around, then at the extremely messy bed. He raised the corners of his eyes, and a faint layer of anger covered them. He sneered. So it's another shameless bed climber. With that, Lu Zixi got up and walked into the bathroom with his naked body. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at -10. It was only -10. He wasn't excited at all. Wei Wei Bai was still confused. Where's the memory? Did you forget to pay for the broadband? Why do you keep disconnecting? System, I'm hungry. I've been malnourished recently, so I often feel like my energy is lacking. Wei Wei Bai hesitated. Why don't you go to the cafeteria and get a meal to eat? The system was silent for a while before it was moved. You're so generous. Wei Wei Bai, am I such a stingy host? Both host and system fell into awkward silence. Fortunately, there was an automatic reminder to break this unspeakable awkwardness. Please accept the memory, host, the familiar headache came. After accepting the memory, Wei Wei Bai hesitated. So, in this world, I'm going to have a forbidden love. // Chapter 436. Lu Zixi finished showering and came out wrapped in a towel. His broad shoulders, narrow hips, and strong legs were like a moving aphrodisiac, making people unable to control themselves. He faintly glanced at the woman on the bed. Last night, he got drunk and went to bed with a woman he didn't know. Just thinking about it made him sick. You're a new artist in the company, right? Which movie do you want the female lead for? Just say the word and we'll call it even. With that, he turned his back to Wei Wei Bai and smoothly put on his clothes. Suddenly, a small hand softly tugged at the corner of his clothes. Lu Zixi coldly narrowed his eyes, his expression indifferent. Let go. Don't push your luck. He'd seen too many greedy women. It was simply unappetizing. This was also why he never touched women in the entertainment industry. Last night was Tian Na Corporation's 25th anniversary. All the artists and people from the entertainment industry were present. He drank a few more glasses and woke up in a daze to see a strange woman lying next to him. At this moment, he felt like he'd eaten a fly. A female lead was generous enough to send her away. If she wanted more, he could raise his hand and freeze her. The owner of the small hand seemed frightened. Her fingers trembled violently. Finally, she choked out, "Uncle, I won't report you. Can you not tell anyone?" "Uncle," Lu Zixi's eyes turned cold. He turned his head, but saw the strange woman on his bed, a girl. She had her head down. Her body was wrapped in the sheets, revealing nothing. A few strands of her long black hair were sticking up. Her fingers gently tugged at his clothes. She appeared exceptionally well behaved. She sobbed, "Don't tell anyone. If my mother knew that I was sleeping with an old man," she seemed to find this sentence very shameful. A thin layer of pink stained the back of her ears. "She'll kill me." "Old man," Lu Zixi face darkened. Suddenly, she glanced up at him. Her large almond eyes were filled with panicked tears. Her soft white skin didn't have a trace of blemish. She looked abnormally young and pure, full of the aura of a young girl. She held on, but she couldn't hide the fear in her eyes. "I beg you, uncle, don't tell anyone." Lu Zixi was a little confused. "How old are you? Did he sleep with an underage girl?" Wei Bai hesitated for a moment. "It was my birthday yesterday. I just turned 18. Only then did Lu Zixi relax. Fortunately, she wasn't underage. However, 18 wasn't that old. If it was sold at such a young age, it definitely wouldn't be anything good. Lu Zixi fiercely shook off her hand. "All right, stop pretending to be pitiful. Remember to find your agent and have him report to me." Wei Bai staggered a few steps, stepped on the sheets, and directly sat on the ground. Lu Zixi had already walked to the door. He opened it and casually turned his head to take a look. Then he saw her bewildered look. Her white and soft skin was so delicate that it could be broken with a single blow. Her innocent expression was so cute that it seemed like she didn't know anything. Lu Zixi didn't know why, but this was the first time such a small girl had climbed into his bed. He frowned and turned to leave. As soon as the door closed, Wei Bai jumped up from the ground. "Tongzi, I think that if Lu Zixi knew that I was his sister, he would probably beat me to death." "System, which male lead didn't want to beat you to death in the beginning?" Wei Bai thought about it. She didn't know if it was because of the system's shielding, but her memory of all the planes she had conquered was a little fuzzy. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the button at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 437. But in these vague memories. Yes, almost all the male leads did want to beat her to death. Hee hee. After digesting the memories this time, Wei Bai felt that the scale was a bit too big. Saying that she was Lu Zixi's sister didn't really count. This involved the previous generation's dog blood grudges. Wei Bai's mother was called Bai Ziwen. When she was young, she was a small-time actress in the entertainment circle. She was beautiful and ambitious. After a while, she hooked up with Lu Zixi's father, Lu Rinjia. Then she got pregnant and gave birth to a daughter. Lu Rinjia had a wife, the only daughter of the director of the entertainment circle's leading company. Because Lu Rinjia cheated, she couldn't take it anymore and took the 7-year-old Lu Zixi to jump off a building. Lu Zixi survived, but his mother died miserably. After so many years. Lu Rinjia died long ago. Lu Zixi took over his grandfather's and his father's career and became the new leader of the entertainment circle. He could call the wind and summon the rain in the entertainment circle. And Bai Ziwen was more miserable. After Lu Zixi's mother died, she was afraid of revenge. She left with her daughter, who was only 2 years old. Because of neglect, her daughter died of a high fever. Bai Ziwen still had hope in her heart to return to the Lu family. Her daughter was her only bargaining chip. She refused to give up and went to the orphanage to adopt the original owner, who was similar to her daughter. She thought that if there was an opportunity, she would take the fake Wei Bai to acknowledge her ancestors. But before she could go back, Lu Rinjia died. Without a backer, Bai Ziwen could only temporarily put her plan on hold, thinking that she would go back when she had the chance. But for various reasons, she didn't succeed even when the original owner grew up. Bai Ziwen finally gave up on this unrealistic plan. She also decided not to raise the original owner, who was a money loser. Last night, on the original owner's birthday, Bai Ziwen took the money. Then she got her drunk and threw her into the room of a fat, short, and ugly director. The original owner was smart enough to stumble and run away. She directly broke into Lu Zixi hotel room. Then she directly lay down and slept next to Lu Zixi, who was also drunk and sleeping like a dead pig. Both of them had the habit of sleeping naked. Well, that was how the misunderstanding started. Wei Bai wrapped herself in a blanket and went to take a shower. She decided to sort out this complicated relationship and then think about how she should approach him. After taking a shower, she asked the hotel service staff to buy her a new set of clothes. When she was packing up the original owner's things, she saw the phone. Many of the calls were from his mother. Wei Bai thought for a while before calling her back. As soon as the call connected, Bai Ziwen's cold voice sounded. "Where did you go last night? Do you know how angry Director Lin is? How are you going to debut like this, blah blah blah." The woman's voice was as sharp as a noise. Wei Bai had already put her phone aside and let her vent. Then, she leisurely picked up a nail clipper and began to trim her nails. When she was almost done, Wei Bai picked up the phone again. "He's already dead. Why aren't you saying anything?" "Forget it, I won't force you anymore." Bai Ziwen's voice suddenly softened. Bai Wei reviewed her memories. This woman wasn't someone who was easy to talk to. "Sure enough," Bai Ziwen said, "you know Lu Zixi, right?" Wei Bai cleared her throat and quickly got into character. Her voice was soft and timid. "Yes, mother, I know." Bai Ziwen shouted excitedly, "This is your brother. He is the CEO of Tian Na. We are going to be rich." Wei Bai. Transmigration system, Adonis, come here, /crossover system, Adonis, come here and read the full article at https://www.sashu. Download Transmigration system, Adonis, come here, Transmigration system, Adonis, come here, comma. Chapter 438. Didn't Bai Ziwen give up on the idea of returning to the family? Bai Ziwen thought she was shocked, so she held back her excitement and said coldly, "Okay, pack up. We'll go and return to the family tomorrow." She hung up the phone. Wei Bai was silent for a long time before asking the system, "What happened?" The system flipped through the information and sent her a short memory of Bai Ziwen. Wei Bai glanced at it and found that Bai Ziwen had entrusted it to an old lover of hers. It was a manager of the Lu family who had started to fake a DNA paternity test. She planned to blackmail Lu Zixi. She wanted to split the Lu family's assets. After all, she had been jealous of such a big entertainment company like Tian Na for a long time. She waited until now to blackmail him. It was only now that Bai Ziwen found someone who was willing to take the risk for her and fake a paternity test. Wei Bai's face was paralyzed. "Tongzi, I've never seen such a sick mother." The system said, "It's not that the mother is a scum, it's that the scum became the mother. Just put up with it." Wei Bai thought for a while, "No, if I really become Lu Zixi's sister, even if Lu Zixi doesn't strangle me, he won't be able to conquer me." Most people don't like incest. So she had to think of a way to destroy this paternity test. Make an anonymous call and tell the Liu family that the paternity test was fake. That should be a good idea. Wei Wei Bai was just thinking about it when the system's voice rang out. Have you ever dreamed of him silently turning on a lamp for you, keeping watch for you alone? Have you ever seen him bending down to carry you on his back when the road was soft in the heavy rain? Have you ever, Wei Wei Bai said, ever your sister, just spit it out. Are you trying to cheat me of my money? The system immediately said, the good brother and good sister side mission has been activated. Please don't let the male lead find out that you are not biological siblings before you complete the mission. If the side mission fails, the host will run around the Earth's equator naked. Does the host accept the side mission? Yes, the host accepts. Wei Wei Bai was speechless. She had already given up on this bandit side quest. Running around the equator naked. Was she a fragrant milk tea? Wei Wei Bai sighed deeply and looked haggard. Compared to running around the world naked. She suddenly realized that she was going to do something like German orthopedics with her brother. It wasn't that difficult. The next day, Bai Ziwen appeared in a flirtatious red dress and sunglasses. She was in her late 40s and maintained herself well. She was curvaceous in front and behind, incomparably alluring. Let's go. Bai Ziwen dragged Wei Wei Bai into the car. Your brother is now talking to someone in the bamboo pavilion in the south of the city. If you go there now, you can still see him. Bai Ziwen was extremely anxious. The paternity test had been sent over. Her old lover also said that the Liu family admitted that Wei Wei Bai was Liu Renjia's daughter. But Liu Zixi didn't intend to recognize them. Bai Ziwen had done so many things. How could she give up? Furthermore, she still owed a huge debt at the casino. If she couldn't enter the Liu family, she would be hacked to death by the people at the casino. She didn't have any way out. The Bamboo Pavilion was the best private restaurant in the city. It was impossible to enter unless one was powerful. Bai Ziwen could even bribe the waiter of the restaurant and sneak in with Wei Wei Bai. When you see your brother later, pounce on him, hug him, and call him brother. Bai Ziwen pinched her hand hard. Wei Wei Bai was silent for a moment. She lowered her eyes and looked coldly at her hand. Chapter 439. Do you remember? We can't fail. Wei Wei Bai finally nodded. Yes, Mom. Bai Ziwen immediately smiled. Wei Wei is the best. Wei Wei Bai, hee hee. With this kind of mother, she really wanted her to fly. Liu Zixi was currently discussing a new movie to invest in with the great director, Xiao Yi. When the discussion was almost over, Xiao Yi smiled and said, "Why don't you be the male lead this time? You haven't appeared on the screen since you left the industry after winning the Best Actor award at the age of 20. Liu Zixi's eyebrows were deep. The mottled shadow of the bamboo at the door fell on his handsome face. For a moment, it was so breathtaking that it made people stop breathing. He was incomparably indifferent. The company's matters are busy enough. I don't need to go out and show my face. He entered the entertainment industry at the age of 15 and muddled along until he won the Best Actor award at the age of 20. It was only to understand the operations of the entertainment industry better when he took over the company. Xiao Yi was somewhat regretful. It's really hard to find a male lead with the same qualifications as you. Liu Zixi casually lit a cigarette. Take your time. You'll find that it's not really hard to find someone with the same qualifications as me, but impossible. After he finished speaking, he suddenly saw a white figure from the corner of his eye. It was like déjà vu. It seemed to be the girl who woke up in his bed the night before yesterday. Until today, she hadn't asked her agent to come and ask for a reward. Lu Zishi thought of her white and soft skin. Under the light, it was sparkling and translucent. And the look in her eyes when she looked at him was innocent and soft. In hindsight, she reeked of alcohol. Perhaps she was forced into his bed. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to -5. Wei Wei Bai heard the notification, although she didn't know how the favorability rose. But when she called him brother later, Lu Zishi's favorability would probably plummet. -20 or -30 wouldn't be a problem. But when she thought of running around the world naked, even if it was -100, she had to brace herself. Suddenly, two figures walked in front of her. She didn't recognize one of them. The other was Lu Zishi. Wei Wei Bai hesitated for half a second. Sooner or later, he was going to be her brother. Procrastination was not her style. Wei Wei Bai rushed forward a few steps, abruptly reached out, and fiercely hugged Lu Zishi. Lu Zishi's entire body stiffened. Before he could react, he heard the girl in his arms call out to him clearly and sweetly. Brother. Lu Zishi was at a loss for a few seconds. Wei Wei Bai buried her head in his chest and hugged him tightly. Her soft body squeezed into his embrace. Lu Zishi could even feel the soft warmth of her chest pressing against him. Her voice trembled slightly. Brother. The way she called him big brother was very sweet and gentle. Lu Zishi's hearing was tickled by her. He couldn't help but lower his head and was about to say something. However, he saw her raise her head, revealing her delicate and cute oval face. Her face was bright red, and her eyes were filled with admiration. She opened her mouth as if she wanted to call him brother again. However, his expression suddenly changed. She saw his face clearly, and her tone changed. Uncle, Wei Wei Bai released him in shock and immediately retreated a few steps. Her face was deathly pale. I'm sorry, Uncle. I mistook you for someone else. Oh, silly child. How could you mistake someone else for someone else? Didn't Mom tell you that this is your brother, Lu Zishi? Bai Ziwen rushed over and pushed Wei Wei Bai into Lu Zishi's arms. Xiao Bai, do you remember me? Auntie Bai. This is your sister, Wei Wei Bai. You haven't seen her yet, right? When Bai Ziwen appeared, Lu Zishi's face had already sunk, and his eyes were as cold as ice. Oh, my sister. Bai Ziwen smiled beautifully. Of course. Do you remember Xiaowei? You met when you were little. Lu Zishi only felt that the girl in his arms was trembling in fear. She seemed unable to accept the fact that they were siblings. After all, they had just slept together. Lu Zishi recalled his mother's tragic death by jumping off a building. The corners of his lips slowly curved into a mocking sneer. His fingers passed through Wei Wei Bai's long hair, touched her delicate neck, and lifted it up with force. Her tightly lowered face was forced to appear in front of his eyes. Her soft eyes and childish and pure face were filled with disbelief. Lu Zishi said softly, "Hello, sister." His tone was full of malice and cold disgust. Ding, the male lead's good feelings are -20. Comma. Chapter 440. Wei Wei Bai watched as the favorability plummeted, climbing from -20 to -25. She took a deep look at Lu Zishi in the driver's seat. She couldn't help but say to the system, he won't drive me out into the wild to kill and dismember me, right? The system comforted her, it's okay, I've already memorized his license plate number. If you're in trouble, I'll call the police. Wei Wei Bai, Lu Zishi said, "Hello, little sister." He carried her away. Bai Ziwen, however, said excitedly, "Are you willing to recognize your little sister?" Auntie is so happy. Lu Zishi raised his cold eyes and curled the corners of his mouth. A perfect mocking expression appeared. I recognize my little sister, but not my stepmother. Who do you think you are? After speaking, Lu Zishi instructed the waiter. He drove by Ziwen, who had snuck in, out of the restaurant. From beginning to end, Wei Wei Bai was like a transparent person. Lu Zishi drove back to the Lu family. When the car entered the garage, he looked in the rearview mirror, distraught. In the mirror, she wore a small white dress that exposed her shoulders. Her round shoulders were so white that they seemed to glow. A few strands of hair fell behind her ears and fell to the side of her delicate cheeks. She sat with her head down, her body tense, as if she was enduring something. As if sensing his cold gaze, she timidly raised her head. He didn't know if it was because of fear, but the corners of her eyes were red. Surprisingly, good-looking. Lu Zishi hurriedly withdrew his gaze. The loathing in his heart didn't diminish in the slightest. Back then, his mother had been forced to jump off a building by Ziwen. When he closed his eyes, the scene of his mother's mangled flesh was in his mind. Lu Zishi fiercely pounded the steering wheel. She seemed frightened when he saw her in the rearview mirror. She clenched her hands in fear and looked at him in horror. Lu Zishi sneered. Only now did she know to be afraid. How could she not be afraid when she rushed up and called him Big Brother? He stopped the car, opened the door, and turned to leave. He hadn't taken a few steps when he heard hurried footsteps behind him. Then, the corner of his clothes was grabbed again. Let go. Lu Zishi's face was somewhat gloomy. Her fingers trembled, but she tightened her grip. Uncle, how old was he? Lu Zishi's eyes burned with anger, and he ignored the girl behind him. He took out a cigarette from his pocket, lit it, and slowly took a puff. The photo of him smoking back then was so handsome that it flooded the entire entertainment industry. He slanted his eyes slightly and was about to give her a warning, but before he could say anything, Gu Nianji interrupted him. Wei Wei Bai said with a trembling voice, I won't be pregnant, right? Lu Zishi choked on his sarcastic remarks. He coughed and didn't have time to spit out the smoke. Wei Wei Bai looked at her with teary eyes. Her eyes were filled with genuine fear. I didn't take the morning after pill. Did you wear that? Lu Zishi's mind was a bit muddled. Wear what? Condoms. He immediately remembered when he woke up yesterday morning. They were lying on the bed, and because he was too anxious, he didn't pay much attention to it. But as for condoms, he didn't have any. Wei Wei Bai became anxious. Her fingers tightly grasped the corner of his clothes and said pitifully, what if I get pregnant? Lu Zishi's chest felt stuffy. He suddenly sneered, you have the guts to climb into my bed. Why didn't you even take this little precaution? Wei Wei Bai's face was deathly pale. No, I was drunk. I don't know, Lu Zishi frowned, enough. Your mother is a slut, and you're a little slut. The man you slept with is your brother, and you're scared now. Are you worried that you'll give birth to a little retard? Chapter 441. Lu Zishi suddenly threw away the shower. Forget it. Killing you will only dirty my hands. Scram. This was his room. He didn't want her to dirty it. Wei Wei Bai heard his words and her face turned even paler. It was as if she had been sentenced to death. She stammered, Lu Zishi was expressionless. Scram. Don't make me say it a second time. Frightened, Wei Wei Bai stood up, trembling. Then she slowly walked out. Halfway through, she was too weak and staggered a few steps. Unsteady on her feet, she bumped into Lu Zishi's arms. Lu Zishi was about to push her away. She hesitated, then suddenly grabbed his clothes. She looked up, her eyes red, and softly called out. "Big brother." Lu Zishi stared blankly. Wei Wei Bai unconsciously bit her lip. Most of her body was rubbing against him. Her voice trembled, fragile, and sticky. "Big brother." Simply seductive. And unconsciously seductive at that. Lu Zishi's breathing almost stopped. His muscles were as stiff as stone. "Let go." Wei Wei Bai was even more scared. Her face was full of panic. "Don't drive me away, big brother. I can do anything." These words, along with her moist and soft body, could drive any man crazy. But her eyes were terrifyingly pure. It was as if she didn't know how popular she was with beasts. Lu Zishi felt his breath heat up, but his eyes turned cold. Sure enough, she was the same as her mother. At such a young age, she already knew how to seduce people. He endured the fire in his chest and abdomen and was about to kick her away. All of a sudden, she let out a sob that she had been suppressing. She cried so pitifully that she practically curled into a ball in his arms. "Big brother, are you my big brother?" Lu Zishi paused in his push. She cried, "Don't drive me away. My mother will kill me." These words were full of fear. "If you don't recognize me, she will be very, very angry." Her fingers gripped his clothes so tightly, as if he was her savior. A lot of Lu Zishi's anger was watered down by an inexplicable emotion. Ding, the male lead's favorability is -20. He seemed to have realized that something was wrong with him, so he finally hardened his heart and pushed her away. "That's enough. You look so ugly when you cry." After saying that, he lifted his feet and walked out, not daring to look back. It was as if he was afraid that his heart would soften. Wei Wei Bai's face turned pale as she watched him leave. After a while. Only then did the system reply faintly, "It's already far away, it won't suddenly return." The misery and cowardice on Wei Wei Bai's face stopped crying. She said indifferently, "Lu Zishi's heart is harder than I thought. I thought it would rise to at least 10 points. Although the system was used to seeing the drama queen change her expression, it still couldn't help but say bitterly, "Can you be a little more feminine? My eyes can't stand you acting like a little white flower." Wei Wei Bai sighed. "It's not that I don't want to slap Bai Ziwen so hard that she'll circle the earth and then force myself on Lu Zishi, robbing him of favorable impression points. However, what? Wei Wei Bai, however, Lu Zishi's mother died a tragic death. If I force myself, he'll probably treat me as an enemy and take revenge on me. At that time, the favorability would be -100 every minute. Wei Wei Bai, do you know what kind of identity can make Lu Zishi's favorability increase the most?" The system was silent for a moment, then tried to say, "Wearing a bunny ear suit and calling him brother's little sister in bed?" Wei Wei Bai. Tongzi, what kind of movies did you watch? Chapter 442. She resisted the urge to beat the system. "No, I'm a victim like him." "System, your mother was also forced to jump off a building by a mistress." Wei Wei Bai was expressionless. "Give me back the cafeteria food you bought with my life points." "System, I just ate it. I'll spit it out and give it back to you. It's still fresh and warm." Wei Wei Bai, after Lu Zishi walked out and saw the housekeeper, he stopped in his tracks. "Young master." The housekeeper immediately greeted him. He was silent for a moment, then said reluctantly, "Have someone send over some ready-made women's clothes." Housekeeper, "Okay, what size do you want?" Lu Zishi, 165 meters tall, 42 kilograms weight, 3 measurements, long legs, broad shoulders. The first thing he said was super standard body measurements. The housekeeper nodded. Young master, you really know. This sentence made Lu Zishi choke. The housekeeper said again, you're a bit thin. Lu Zishi, don't look thin, it's just a small bone structure. It's very soft to the touch. Housekeeper. What did he just hear? Lu Zishi. What did he just say? The housekeeper suddenly smiled in understanding. I understand. Lu Zishi, what the fuck do you understand? The system waited for a long time. Why are you still pouring cold water on me? Wei Wei Bai's face was cold. Using self-injury to gain sympathy. I'm getting a fever to win sympathy. System, you've been pouring cold water on me for more than half an hour, but your physical condition is still very good. If you stay any longer, the male lead will come back. Wei Wei Bai sighed. This body has Sister Lin's shell, but it's as strong as an ox. System, are you still worried about your body being too healthy? Do you feel that you can't keep up with the times without coughing up blood every 3 steps? Do you, Wei Wei Bai, do you need a beating? If you promote the advertisement again, I'll beat you until you cough up 3 pounds of blood every step. The system spoke quickly. Beautiful disease capsule. 1 capsule gives you a day's worth of HP. It allows you to fall sick without any worries. You can have a high fever or faint as you wish. You can have any illness you want. Wei Wei Bai. Let's buy it. She was beautiful even when she was sick. That sounded alright. After Lu Zishi finished giving his orders, he stayed by the railing and smoked in a particularly bad mood. He lowered his head and saw the grass downstairs. In a trance, he saw his mother dragging him and jumping off the roof of a building. He was lucky enough to be blocked by the canopy and saved his life. As for his mother, her limbs were twisted, and her flesh was mangled. Lu Zishi's face paled a bit. He took a few more puffs of his cigarette and then stopped his recollection. I will make Bai Ziwen and her daughter wish they were dead. Back then, it was because he knew about the existence of Wei Wei Bai. His mother had committed suicide because of her depression. Therefore, in his heart, Wei Wei Bai was no different from a murderer. Could she still be in his room? Lu Zishi calmly walked back, determined to drive her out of the room. He pushed the door open and entered, only to see a wet dress on the chair. Under the chair was a pair of light-colored, low-waisted panties. There was also a bra of the same color. They were all wet. Lu Zishi immediately looked away, only to see that on his big black bed, under the thin sheets, a beautiful curve of a body appeared. She even dared to sleep in his bed. Lu Zishi angrily walked over, lifted the sheets, and said through clenched teeth, Wei Wei Bai, you're courting death. She didn't have any reaction. She wore his shirt and didn't button up much of the collar. A large area of delicate white appeared. Lu Zishi didn't feel the slightest bit of pity. He reached out and grabbed her arm, only to find that her whole body was boiling hot. He frowned, loosened his hand, and touched her face. Hot to the touch, a severe fever. She seemed to have just realized that someone was here. She opened her eyes in a daze. Her pupils were moist and hazy. Suddenly, she revealed a dazed smile. Brother, you came to save me. Lu Zishi, save you. Wei Wei Bai, Mom kept hitting me. She said that if you liked me, you wouldn't hit me. Lu Zishi stared blankly. She softly reached out and grabbed his cuff. So when will you like me? Lu Zishi didn't answer. There was an indescribable feeling in his heart. He didn't know why, but he felt somewhat uncomfortable. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the button at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 443. He didn't know what he was thinking. Did she hit you all the time? Wei Wei Bai's face was bright red. She blinked her almond eyes and looked at him with misty eyes. Her voice was weak and delicate. She didn't hit me all the time. She hit me once in a while. Lu Zixi face was expressionless, but his eyes were dark. Once in a while. How? Wei Wei Bai struggled to think. Maybe it was because of the fever, but she was unbelievably well behaved. Just, hit me with a chair or hit me with a clothes rack. Sometimes she won't let me eat because I'm not sensible. Lu Zixi frowned. You're not sensible? When Wei Wei Bai heard this, she seemed very scared. She immediately picked up the quilt and covered herself, revealing 2 watery eyes. I ate too much, so I'm not sensible. Lu Zixi ate too much and not sensible? When he was young, he didn't eat a single meal. His entire family, including dozens of people, surrounded him, begging him to eat more. What kind of insensible behavior was this? Also, I talked too much and made Mom angry. Lu Zixi was deeply suspicious. What was the boundary of not being sensible? Talking too much was also not sensible. Was it holding a loudspeaker in the middle of the night and yelling in front of someone's bed? And me, I was sick and not sensible. Mom also hit me. Wei Wei Bai looked at him cautiously. Lu Zixi finally asked hesitantly, Are you sick? What did being sick and not sensible have to do with it? Wei Wei Bai seemed to have been poked. She immediately jumped and said, I'm not sick. Really, I'm not sick. Lu Zixi cast a cold glance and suddenly grabbed her quilt. His fingers were about to touch her forehead. Wei Wei Bai closed her eyes in fright. She didn't dare to look at him and trembled. His fingers fell on her pure white forehead. It was scalding hot. It felt like burning someone to death. His frown deepened. Suddenly, her weak little hand gently placed on his wrist, trembling violently. Mom, she closed her eyes and pitifully said, I'm just too hot. I'm not sick. She even seemed to be trying to please him. Her fingers gently touched his wrist, and her eyes were slightly raised. She looked very innocent. However, the corners of her eyes were dyed red. This shy glance was pure and charming, moving one's heartstrings. Lu Zixi only felt the force of her fingertips lightly brushing against his wrist, causing a burst of numbness. He hurriedly withdrew his hand with an ugly expression on his face. If he didn't know that a person with such a high fever wouldn't be conscious. He even suspected that she was trying to seduce him. Mom. She was a little slow as she tilted her head and looked at him with her big, watery eyes. Lu Zixi coldly said, Who's your mother? Shut up. Wei Wei Bai immediately pouted and looked at him pitifully. There was no sense of accomplishment in bullying such a woman. Irritated, Lu Zixi loudly called for someone to come and had the housekeeper invite a doctor. He didn't want to torture her yet. She hung up first. Who was like him, so sullen even when taking revenge on someone? As a result, as soon as the doctor came in with a medical kit, Wei Wei Bai immediately reached out and grabbed his hand in fear. Lu Zixi only felt that her fingers were as soft as clouds as they tickled his palm. She was afraid to hide behind him. Don't come over. I'm not sick. Lu Zixi impatiently turned back. What are you doing? Do you want to die? Wei Wei Bai's body stiffened, and she gently let go of his hand. Then she lay back on the bed. Her face was red, her lips were dry and pale, and her eyes were so vacant that it made one's heart ache. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the button at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 445. Wei Wei Bai fell silent. Just when Lu Zixi thought she was asleep. Finally, He heard the sound of her broken sobs. That's great. Big brother finally responded to me. I was so afraid of waking up. Then I wouldn't be able to dream of such a good thing. She was so sick that she wanted to die. He just responded to her, and she was so moved. Lu Zishi couldn't understand Wei Wei Bai's train of thought at all. His thoughts of revenge were once again extinguished by her. Wei Wei Bai unconsciously called out, "Big brother," a few more times, and then fell into a deep sleep. Lu Zishi breathed a sigh of relief. Suddenly, the housekeeper walked over with light steps. "Young master, the information is here." Lu Zishi took the information and began to flip through it. The more he flipped, the gloomier his expression became. When he reached the end, he was about to throw the information out. But then he thought of something. He glanced at the person sleeping on the bed and swallowed his anger. Then he got up and walked out to a relatively distant place. He suddenly threw the information out and then kicked a decorative vase in the hallway. The information that flew to the ground was spread out. It was shockingly full of medical records and shocking pictures of scars. The things in the information. Lu Zishi thought he could only see it on the news. The beatings, torture, and imprisonment actually started when she was 2 or 3 years old. If he hadn't met Wei Wei Bai, he wouldn't have thought of investigating it. How did he find out about this? Bai Ziwen, that crazy woman, after leaving his father for a year, she couldn't bear the loneliness. She took the child and hooked up with other men. And she even left the 3-year-old Wei Wei Bai alone in a rented house. There was no drink when she was thirsty. There was no food when she was hungry. She almost starved to death several times in the rented house. Later, a community volunteer found her and saved her. That was why she was able to leave some paper information for him to search. Later, Lu Rinjia died. Bai Ziwen probably thought she couldn't return to the Lu family. So she began to abuse Wei Wei Bai, who was only a few years old. The most serious incident was when he hit her with a chair until her ribs were broken. Only after being admitted to the hospital could the information be kept. The information in the hospital was only recorded when she was seriously injured. But those countless small wounds, after being abused day and night, did not leave behind any scars. Bai Ziwen regarded Bai Weiwei as a trash can for her to vent her anger in a frenzy. In other words, Weiwei Bai grew up in an abusive environment. No wonder he was so submissive and his eyes were filled with fear. This information had only been transferred in a hurry. She wondered what other heartless things Bai Ziwen had done that had not been found out yet. Lu Zishi lowered his head and took out a cigarette. His stern face was frighteningly taut. He saw the information. He could almost see the tiny Weiwei Bai, covered in scars, cowering in a corner in fear. Suddenly, he saw that he was stepping on a piece of paper. Just now, he was too anxious to look at it, so he neglected this one. He bent down and picked it up. There was a paragraph on it. It said that there was a time when Weiwei Bai was abused and had hallucinations. She drew an elder brother on the paper to accompany her. This was also recorded by the medical team. Her brother was drawn. Not him, Lu Zishi couldn't help but sneer. Nonsense. How could Weiwei Bai recognize him at that time? No wonder she kept calling him brother when she was confused. The person she was calling was her imaginary brother. How desperate did a person have to be? She could only rely on her hallucinations to survive. Chapter 446. Lu Zishi lit a cigarette, his fingers trembling. The smile on his lips slowly turned bitter. Living so miserably, how the hell am I supposed to take revenge? The people he hated the most were the mother and daughter pair. Cheating wasn't enough to make his mother jump off a building. Weiwei Bai, that vile spawn, was the last straw that broke his mother's rationality. So the people he hated weren't just Bai Ziwen. Wei Wei Bai was one of the main culprits. But when he saw the scars all over the floor, he couldn't help but feel hatred. Ding, the male lead's favorability is -5. The butler walked over and bent down to tidy up the information. When he saw the medical records on the paper, he couldn't help but sigh, this mother is also a beast. How did such a small child survive? When Lu Zishi heard this, the cigarette between his fingers fell to the ground. He immediately turned and left, afraid that if he heard a few more words, his heart would completely soften. No matter how hard a person's heart was, seeing a child being abused, it was impossible to remain indifferent. What's more, no matter how much he didn't admit it, Wei Wei Bai was also his sister. Ding, the male lead's favorability is 0. Wei Wei Bai was sleeping soundly when she heard the system's roar. The favorability went to 0 all of a sudden. What's going on? Is my system poisoned? Wei Wei Bai's head hurt. The after effects of the forced high fever made her limbs weak. She forced herself to think before saying, didn't I spend 3 days of my life points to make you fabricate information? It was true that the original owner didn't live very well. Bai Ziwen didn't pay much attention to her daughter. So other than the necessary living expenses, she didn't take care of her. When she was young, she was also thrown to the nanny. After all, Bai Ziwen's face was still useful. She had done a lot of things like fooling around, so there was no problem for her to support herself. If she didn't get addicted to gambling later on, she wouldn't have turned her attention to the original owner. What child abuse, not giving her food, and so on. It was all fabricated by Wei Wei Bai when she watched legal programs. Now that she had life points, she could spend them appropriately to make the strategy easier. The system said, just those materials can make the male lead's favorability go straight to 0. Wei Wei Bai, of course, as long as you're not a beast, you won't even be able to sympathize with me, let alone hate me. If it weren't for Lu Zishi hating her for so many years. He reckoned that the favorability would increase by another wave. Now that the favorability had reached 0, it was worth it to live for the past 3 days. The system said, why don't I feel anything when I look at the data? Wei Wei Bai, because you're a beast. Xiao Yi hurriedly rushed over from the shooting location. Why do you have time to ask me out? Are you going to change your mind and make a comeback? The man sitting sideways on the chair had an astonishingly perfect side profile under the light. Under his high nose, his thin lips were slightly pursed. His eyes were beautiful peach blossom eyes, but they were slightly narrower than peach blossom eyes. He glanced at them indifferently. The light in his eyes was so dazzling that it could capture one's soul. Just by simply sitting there, his entire body was filled with drama. This was Lu Zishi. He said coldly, I asked you out for a drink. Xiao Yi raised his hand for the bartender to bring the wine. Is there something bothering you? If there wasn't anything bothering him, he wouldn't have come here to drink. Lu Zishi's eyes were cold. No. Xiao Yi said, of course there is. Could it be a woman's matter? Lu Zishi's mind was a bit scattered. He hadn't gone back for a week because he didn't know how to face Wei Wei Bai. Hating her made him think of her miserable past. If he didn't hate her, he would feel sorry for her. Suddenly, Lu Zishi looked up at the TV in front of the bar. It was advertising time. Bright colors, an emerald green forest, and a slender white figure ran out of the green like an elf. She wore a knee-length white skirt, and her soft long hair was tied into a playful high ponytail. Under the sunlight, she suddenly looked back and smiled. The bright light fell into her eyes, stunning everyone. Xiao Yi stood up at once. Good seedling. Her ability to perform on camera is amazing. Lu Zishi stared blankly at the TV. Wei Wei Bai. In the camera, she was unbelievably smart and witty. Those cowardly and fearful expressions had all disappeared. Lu Zishi didn't know why, but his heart seemed to be stirred. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 5. / For convenience next time, you can click on the Chapter 447. Xiao Yi clutched his heart. I can't do it. Who is this girl? She's my angel. I'll definitely find her. Suddenly, he felt a little chilly. Xiao Yi turned his head and saw Lu Zishi looking at him with cold eyes. Those eyes seemed to hold a grudge against him. Xiao Yi trembled. What did he say just now? Did he offend Lu Zishi? Lu Zishi's face was cold. He glanced at the TV again. The commercial had ended. He fiercely downed the wine in his hand, then got up to pay the bill. I'm leaving. Xiao Yi, wait, didn't you invite me to drink? But Lu Zishi had already taken a step forward and left. Xiao Yi stayed in place with a sluggish expression. He belatedly remembered that this guy, Lu Zishi, seemed to only pay his own bill. Did he have to be so stingy? He was clearly the one who invited him. Bai Weiwei's commercial completely exploded in popularity. In fact, when Bai Weiwei ran to shoot an advertisement, she didn't expect the advertisement to be broadcast so quickly. She had shot the commercial purely because of the reward from the previous world side mission. Ding, reward, pinnacle little fresh temperament. Whether you're walking with your nose up in the air, holding a brick while eating mutton skewers with a ferocious expression, or spitting on the street, you can reach 360 degrees without any blind spots. Pure and moving, cute and beautiful, like the nation's first love. What a good reward. It was just that this commercial was too disgusting. To verify the effect of the reward, she shot an ordinary green tea commercial. She casually smiled at the camera. Then she blushed. Now, the streets were filled with posters of her looking back and smiling, her eyes full of sunshine. Green tea sister posts were everywhere on the internet. Wei Wei Bai, if I had known, I wouldn't have shot the green tea commercial. Green tea sister, that was too unpleasant to hear. Even if it was just milk tea, it would have been fine. Wei Wei Bai returned home, to Bai Ziwen's home. After shooting the commercial, she didn't take anything with her and left the Lu family. The system was still advising her, the pavilion closest to the water enjoys moonlight first, why are you still leaving? Wei Wei Bai was unperturbed. The smell is far, but the smell is near. Moreover, I'm with Bai Ziwen. It would be strange if Lu Zishi didn't have any reaction. The abused sister returned to the side of the sadist. Any brother with a bit of conscience would be soft-hearted. Bai Ziwen was at home. She was drunk when she saw Wei Wei Bai coming back. He began to curse, why are you only back now? Do you know how many times Director Lin has looked for me? She desperately wanted Bai Weiwei to recognize her ancestors and return to her family. But seeing Lu Zishi's attitude, Bai Ziwen also knew that there was almost no hope for her to acknowledge her ancestors. Lu Rinjia was also dead, so there was even less hope. Therefore, she gave up on the idea of returning to her family. She wanted to sell Wei Wei Bai for some money. Wei Wei Bai leisurely sat on the sofa and then opened the dessert that she had just bought. While eating, she watched Bai Ziwen act like a drunkard. Bai Ziwen continued to curse. If it wasn't for me, would you still be alive? You should be grateful. Wei Wei Bai sucked on a mouthful of cream. Delicious. Look at how ugly you are now. If you want to act and be a star, do you think you can do it without sleeping with the director? Wei Wei Bai had a calm expression and continued to eat dessert. I'm talking to you. You actually dare to eat. Bai Ziwen was drunk. She belatedly realized that Wei Wei Bai had been facing her with the back of her head from beginning to end. And she was eating very calmly. She was angry. She staggered over and was about to grab Wei Wei Bai's hair. I'm talking to you. Do you hear me? Wei Wei Bai turned her head and reached out to grab her wrist. With a twist, she pulled hard and pushed her entire body to the ground. Address of the full article, https://www.sashu.com. Address of the Chapter 445. Wei Wei Bai fell silent. Just when Lu Zishi thought she was asleep. Finally, he heard the sound of her broken sobs. That's great. Big brother finally responded to me. I was so afraid of waking up. Then I wouldn't be able to dream of such a good thing. She was so sick that she wanted to die. He just responded to her, and she was so moved. Lu Zishi couldn't understand Wei Wei Bai's train of thought at all. His thoughts of revenge were once again extinguished by her. Wei Wei Bai unconsciously called out, "Big brother," a few more times, and then fell into a deep sleep. Lu Zishi breathed a sigh of relief. Suddenly, the housekeeper walked over with light steps. "Young master, the information is here." Lu Zishi took the information and began to flip through it. The more he flipped, the gloomier his expression became. When he reached the end, he was about to throw the information out. But then he thought of something. He glanced at the person sleeping on the bed and swallowed his anger. Then he got up and walked out to a relatively distant place. He suddenly threw the information out and then kicked a decorative vase in the hallway. The information that flew to the ground was spread out. It was shockingly full of medical records and shocking pictures of scars. The things in the information. Lu Zishi thought he could only see it on the news. The beatings, torture, and imprisonment actually started when she was 2 or 3 years old. If he hadn't met Wei Wei Bai, he wouldn't have thought of investigating it. How did he find out about this? Bai Ziwen, that crazy woman, after leaving his father for a year, she couldn't bear the loneliness. She took the child and hooked up with other men. And she even left the 3-year-old Wei Wei Bai alone in a rented house. There was no drink when she was thirsty. There was no food when she was hungry. She almost starved to death several times in the rented house. Later, a community volunteer found her and saved her. That was why she was able to leave some paper information for him to search. Later, Lu Rinjia died. Bai Ziwen probably thought she couldn't return to the Lu family. So she began to abuse Wei Wei Bai, who was only a few years old. The most serious incident was when he hit her with a chair until her ribs were broken. Only after being admitted to the hospital could the information be kept. The information in the hospital was only recorded when she was seriously injured. But those countless small wounds, after being abused day and night, did not leave behind any scars. Bai Ziwen regarded Bai Weiwei as a trash can for her to vent her anger in a frenzy. In other words, Weiwei Bai grew up in an abusive environment. No wonder he was so submissive and his eyes were filled with fear. This information had only been transferred in a hurry. She wondered what other heartless things Bai Ziwen had done that had not been found out yet. Lu Zishi lowered his head and took out a cigarette. His stern face was frighteningly taut. He saw the information. He could almost see the tiny Weiwei Bai, covered in scars, cowering in a corner in fear. Suddenly, he saw that he was stepping on a piece of paper. Just now, he was too anxious to look at it, so he neglected this one. He bent down and picked it up. There was a paragraph on it. It said that there was a time when Weiwei Bai was abused and had hallucinations. She drew an elder brother on the paper to accompany her. This was also recorded by the medical team. Her brother was drawn. Not him, Lu Zishi couldn't help but sneer. Nonsense. How could Wei Wei Bai recognize him at that time? No wonder she kept calling him brother when she was confused. The person she was calling was her imaginary brother. How desperate did a person have to be? She could only rely on her hallucinations to survive. Chapter 449. This kind of scum. Bai Ziwen actually sent Wei Wei Bai to this kind of scum and pervert's bed. And it wasn't the first time. She ran away last time. Lu Zishi heard the familiar name of the hotel inside the door. Wasn't it the hotel where he woke up last time? Could it be that the last time she ran into his room was an accident? Lu Zishi frowned and thought about it. He felt that Wei Wei Bai's personality wasn't like a woman who was used to climbing into bed. If she had the IQ, she wouldn't have returned to Bai Ziwen's side and been beaten, scolded, and sold. He brought her back to the Lu family. If she was thick-skinned, the right thing to do would be to cling onto him and not let him go. But when he got home, he found out that she was long gone. Suddenly, the door quieted down. Lu Zishi's fingers trembled, and some terrible speculations flashed through his mind. Wei Wei Bai had been beaten to death. She deserved to be beaten to death. What did it have to do with him? Lu Zishi smiled coldly. His delicate features were gloomy, but his gaze was particularly ruthless. He wasn't a good person. Bai Ziwen's mother was worse than death. That was what he wanted to see the most. His daughter would be the first to suffer. Then he would deal with Bai Ziwen. Killing two birds with one stone. Suddenly, Wei Wei Bai's weak voice came intermittently from the door. Big brother, this call was so faint that it was almost inaudible. But Lu Zishi didn't know how he heard it. Wei Wei Bai was calling him. He couldn't help but walk to the door and hear Wei Wei Bai say, "When are you going to protect me?" Suddenly, Lu Zishi reacted. Wei Wei Bai wasn't calling him at all. Instead, she was calling, the one who never appeared, the brother she imagined. The brother she made up. Would protect her. Lu Zishi's heart tightened, and his breathing became difficult. It was as if there was a blockage in his lungs. It was very uncomfortable. He suddenly turned around and left, his footsteps frighteningly fast. It was as if he was afraid that if he stayed for a few more seconds, he would do something he would regret. Walking out of the corridor, he saw several posters on the bulletin board in front of him. The girl on the posters had a pure and beautiful smile. Her eyes were clear and bright. It was as if he had never seen the darkness of the world. It was Wei Wei Bai's green tea commercial. This commercial was not a high-end commercial. It was very normal for a director to film. But because of the existence of Wei Wei Bai, it became popular. Those who were still looking for green tea sister did not know that she was being abused by her own mother. Lu Zishi lowered his head, his eyes somewhat red. He didn't know if he was angry or sad. He suddenly said to himself coldly, she deserved it. She deserved to die. Yes, his mother would jump off a building. It was all because of her birth, so don't expect him to admit that. She was his sister. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 10. When Wei Wei Bai heard the reminder, she knew that Lu Zishi's heart had finally softened a little. Hearing that she had such a miserable life. Even if he hated her to death, he would definitely sympathize with her. Everyone had a bad side to them. Seeing the person he hated lead a miserable life would definitely make him feel happy. If it was worse, he might even fake sympathy in his heart. Lu Zishi was in this state. Even if it was fake sympathy, it was still a favorability. Wei Wei Bai, he left. System, he saw you in such a miserable state and felt relieved, so he walked very far away. Wei Wei Bai, this system didn't know how to speak human language. Bai Ziwen also sobered up a little and noticed that something was wrong. She threw things, but it didn't seem to hit Wei Wei Bai. Why was her cheap daughter crying so miserably? At https://www.sashu.com/full text at https://www.sashu.com download text at https://www.sashu.com at https://m/sashu.com. Chapter 450. Wei Wei Bai wore a light blue short-sleeved dress and tidied up her long hair. She took out a small mirror and looked at herself. Very good, youthful, cute, and moving. Her makeup was nude, emphasizing her soft and sweet beauty. Most importantly, it was waterproof. The system deeply suspected that its host had forgotten where it was. Wei Wei Bai, Tong Bao, do you think I'm only 12 years old? Tong Bao. If you say so. The system was depressed. What should it do when the host is always like this? What else could it do? Wei Wei Bai, I think my eyes should be rounder, don't you think so? The system was weathered, if you say so. Wei Wei Bai, the color of the lipstick is a bit dark, I'll adjust it a bit and make it lighter. System, can you adjust the color of lipstick? The hairstyle should be more fluffy, I'll scratch it. The hairstyle looked fluffy, so it was done by hand. I'm missing an eyebrow, I'll draw it. System, how did you know that it was missing a strand? How could you tell? And how could you draw the eyebrows like this? Wei Wei Bai, Bao, the devastated system finally hugged its head and cried out miserably, don't nag me about this, I'm not listening, are you here to conquer or to become a beauty blogger? Wake up, you still need to cut off people's little nipples. And if the host kept calling Bao Bao Bao, it would become the first nervous system in history to strangle its own host. Wei Wei Bai stuffed everything into the makeup bag and then put it into her backpack. Then she very calmly picked up the cup and slowly drank the water. The hotel room's bathroom door opened. A short, fat, and ugly old man walked out with a smile. He saw Wei Wei Bai sitting on the sofa, drinking water with her head down. That water, he had added some hallucinogens. Director Lin's wretched smile deepened. He had been coveting Wei Wei Bai for a long time, she was cute and pure. And for some reason, she looked even more fresh and beautiful today. Uncle has already prepared the female lead position for you, as long as you accompany Uncle for one night, hee hee. Wei Wei Bai finished drinking the water and confirmed that Lu Zixi had entered the hotel. She looked up and smiled. This smile immediately made Director Lin's heart itch unbearably. He repeatedly said, my little baby, come to Uncle. Bai Wei Wei looked at his oily face with 3 layers of chin and said to the system in disgust, Tongzi, it turns out it's so disgusting to be called a baby. The system was gratified. You finally understand how I feel. Wei Wei Bai, Lu Zixi. System, there are still 10 seconds. Bai Wei Wei nodded and suddenly threw herself on the bed. Got up, ran, and flew so 2 seconds. Fatty Lin saw that Wei Wei Bai couldn't wait, so he immediately shook his fat body and climbed onto the bed. Uncle won't treat you badly, the female lead is you. Wei Wei Bai waited for him to climb onto the bed, but 5 seconds had passed. There were still 3 seconds. She immediately lay flat. Then, her eyes went blank and her limbs went soft. She had an appearance of delirium. Fatty Lin was stunned. The drug took effect so quickly. Didn't it take at least 10 minutes to take effect? But he didn't think too much about it. Instead, he happily pounced on her. Uncle will dote on you right now. 10 seconds were up. He had just pressed on top of her when he heard the door being violently kicked open. There was a loud bang. It gave people a fright. TXT. Chapter 451. Putting aside the fact that he hated her. She was really cute. She had no offensive power, and her eyes were round and clean. Lu Zishi looked and looked. Then, for some reason, he picked up his phone and took a picture of her peaceful sleeping face. Then he posted it on his WeChat moments. He wouldn't let Bai Ziwen go back. If she went back, she would either be beaten or sold. No matter how ruthless he was, he couldn't sit by and watch her be humiliated to the point where she couldn't live. So, if he wanted to recognize her as a sister, he had to let his friends in the circle get to know her first. He chose the picture he had just taken of her and wrote, "My sister." But then he thought of some of the dirty deals in the circle and was afraid that others would misunderstand. So, his face immediately darkened and he emphasized, "Biological sister. I just recognized her." He thought no one would see it. At this time, at 2 or 3 in the morning, they were either having fun or sleeping. But he didn't expect. The picture immediately had people like it and leave comments. He clicked on it and took a look. Fuck, she's so cute. Why didn't my dad get me a biological sister outside? With this kind of sister, what's the point of having my dad cheat? Tomorrow, I'll encourage my dad to cheat. B replied to A, your mom will break all 4 of your dad's legs. C, welfare late night welfare. TSK, this face, this chest, these legs, I've never seen such a pure and lovely woman. A reply to C, I only saw the face. Where did the legs and breasts come from? C replied wretchedly, with this kind of face, she must have those kind of legs and breasts. When Lu Zishi saw this kind of message, anger rose in his heart and he took a picture of a pure sleeping face. This group of wretches even imagined the breasts and legs. He swiped his finger and blacklisted C, then, all kinds of messages came out. Give me a dozen sisters like this. No, I'm going to ask my dad if he has an illegitimate daughter outside. There were also some shameless ones who directly called out to Lu Zishi, brother-in-law, I'll come to propose marriage tomorrow. Do you like the land east of the city or my family's 12 private jets? I'll immediately bring them to your door as betrothal gifts. Lu Zishi immediately blacklisted them. This one was also blacklisted. That one was also blacklisted. A bunch of idiots whose brains were filled with yellow filth. They were all blacklisted. Finally, when his WeChat moments quietened down, he sneered, do you really think that your father can give birth to such a cute little sister? Ugly people are more mischievous. Then, he looked at the photos he had taken. Wei Bai turned her face to the side and laid in his arms. Her white and delicate cheeks were tinged with light pink, and a few strands of black hair were scattered messily in front of his chest. Fair, delicate, beautiful, pure. Lu Zishi suddenly and silently deleted the photo. It was too beautiful to be posted on his WeChat moments. Among the people he added, there was no lack of rich second-generation hedonistic sons and such. Who would know that when they looked at the photos? What would that group of wretched people think? After deleting the photos, Lu Zishi belatedly realized what he had done. Not only did he admit that Wei Bai was his younger sister, but he also admitted that she was his younger sister. He even deleted the photos and forbade others from seeing them. He was bewitched. Lu Zishi's mood was a bit chaotic. Then, he lowered his head and saw that she was quietly and softly sleeping. Even the sound of breathing could barely be heard. He didn't know why, but his heart also quieted down. Lu Zishi silently stared at her sleeping face. As he stared, his eyelids grew heavy, and he actually fell asleep. Only then did the system yawn and give a reminder. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 35. Chapter 452. Lu Zishi vaguely woke up. Half asleep, he realized that there was something soft in his arms. He immediately woke up with a start and saw Wei Wei Bai with her head tilted, curled up in his arms. His arm rested horizontally above her head. Her breath gently brushed against his bare chest, bringing a burst of itchiness. Lu Zishi's body stiffened for a while before he carefully moved. He pushed her out of his arms. Wei Wei Bai very meekly turned over and continued to sleep. The quilt fell to her abdomen, and under her disheveled shirt, her fair skin was seductively exposed. Lu Zishi's breathing deepened, and he immediately got out of bed. He hurried to the bathroom. When he came out again, he saw Wei Wei Bai hugging the sheets, sitting alone on the bed, looking at him warily. Lu Zishi's footsteps paused. He tugged at the corners of his mouth, wanting to greet her naturally. But when he thought of his behavior last night, in addition to his previous disgust towards her, it was indeed a bit perverted. He could only expressionlessly say, "You'll live here from now on. I'll have someone clean up a room for you." With that, he turned around and left. Suddenly, she softly called out from behind him, "Big brother." She probed with some uncertainty. Lu Zishi had already walked to the door. He stopped and was silent for a moment before faintly replying, "N." This "N" seemed to unlock the shackles of the old enmity between them. Lu Zishi felt a burst of relief. Suddenly, the sound of light footsteps came from behind him. A soft body hugged him from behind. She hugged his back and softly called out again, "Big brother." This big brother was filled with boundless joy. Her voice was cheerful, "Even if you only recognize me for a day, I'll be very happy." Lu Zishi's nose soured, and he let her hug him. After a long time, he said, "More than a day." Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 40. System. This terrifying increase in favorability is abnormally fast. After brushing up a good wave of favorability, Wei Wei Bai finally gave up tormenting Lu Zishi for the time being. She began to manage her own acting career. Green Tea Sisters commercial is still very popular. After all, Wei Wei Bai was too good-looking. Every man had a cute little sister in their heart. Every girl had a little fresh dream in her heart. And Wei Wei Bai undoubtedly met all of these criteria. The Green Tea Company had also called her, saying that many people had contacted her and wanted her to shoot commercials or act in shows. Even Wei Wei Bai had rejected her, because she had her eyes on a recent blockbuster. It was Xiao Yi's new movie, Dreamlike Flowers. The system said, "Take advantage of your sister's popularity and work hard to increase her favorability." "Why did you go and act?" Wei Wei Bai said righteously, "Because this is the only way to openly seduce others." "What?" "Wei Wei Bai, you don't understand. Just the identity of a younger sister isn't enough to increase favorability. That's why we need to use external forces to stimulate Lu Zishi and increase his favorability." System, with such a wretched mentality and plan, can you not say it so openly? Lu Zishi looked at Xiao Yi somewhat impatiently. "It's time to get off work. If you have something to say it quickly." Xiao Yi's face was filled with pride. "I found the role of the younger sister in Dreamlike Flowers." Lu Zishi absent-mindedly looked at the time. Congratulations. He had been getting off work early these past few days. Every time he came home, he would see a pink figure quietly peeking at him. When she saw that he was back, she would run away like a frightened rabbit. This younger sister of his was a bit timid. But the housekeeper had told him that every time he got off work, she would silently wait for him at the door. Sometimes when he came back late, she would keep waiting and not eat. After that, he went back much earlier. Xiao Yi smiled and said, "She's called Wei Wei Bai. She's the green tea sister who was very popular on the internet." Lu Zixi casually responded, then looked up and said coldly, "Who are you talking about?" Xiao Yi led Lu Zixi downstairs. "She's in the practice room downstairs, practicing with the actor who's playing her brother." Lu Zixi hurried to the practice room. He saw Wei Wei Bai smiling innocently and sweetly. She reached out and hugged the man. She looked up and softly said, "Brother." "Brother," Lu Zixi only felt a surge of fire rising up in him. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the button at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 453. Wei Wei Bai wore a small white dress with an off-the-shoulder neckline, revealing her beautiful collarbone. She was like a pixie, her clear eyes filled with only that strange man. Her face was full of joy and excitement. "Big brother, you just came to see me." The man was a little fresh meat. His handsome and fair face revealed a spring breeze-like smile. He reached out with both hands and lifted Wei Wei Bai into a princess carry. "Didn't I just win the war and rush over to see you?" Wei Wei Bai naturally reached out and hugged his neck. Her head nestled in his embrace, a trace of sadness overflowing from her eyes. "I don't want you to go to war. I only want Big Brother to be by my side, to love me, to protect me." The man immediately felt distressed. "I also want to stay by your side for the rest of my life, but the country needs me." Wei Wei Bai's almond-shaped eyes held a smile. She suddenly leaned close to him. Her soft and delicate face carried pure admiration, causing him to momentarily forget his script and stare blankly. "Big brother, I also need you." The man felt a little breathless. So soft, so cute. He really wanted to take her home. One was pure and sweet, the other young and handsome. From a distance, their posture was intimate and well-matched. It was simply blinding to the eyes. Xiao Yi was still talking non-stop. "Look, how well-matched. In this movie of mine, the brother and sister's relationship is a big highlight. They secretly love each other, but they can't be together because of the secular world. That kind of strong taboo feeling should be acted out by two pure people." The person playing the brother was the newly promoted super-popular little fresh meat in Qian, only 19 years old. He had a young and handsome face and was indeed very pure. She was only 18 years old, the best and cutest age. She was a perfect match for Qian. Standing outside the practice room, Lu Zixi's eyes were gloomy and indifferent. The corners of his mouth pulled into a fake smile. "So, how do you plan to let this pair of pure brother and sister act out the taboo love?" The words brother and sister were especially fiercely enunciated. It felt like he couldn't wait to chew them up and swallow them. Xiao Yi was like a blind and deaf person. He didn't hear the twisted mockery in his tone at all. "Let's have an accidental kissing scene, an uncontrollable passionate kiss, and finally, a bed scene. Think about it. The girl's back is exposed, and she's lying in her brother's arms. It's so exciting." Lu Zixi only felt that the fire had reached the top of his head and was about to burn the entire practice room to ashes. In the practice room, the brother and sister were still hugging each other and looking at each other sweetly. Damn it, did he need to hug her for so long? The rehearsal should be over, right? Why are you still hugging me? And that in Qian, what's with that look in his eyes? He was just short of pouncing on his sister. In the future, if there were to be a kissing scene or a bed scene, it wouldn't become a reality, right? Lu Zishi was also someone who had acted before. There were plenty of instances in the entertainment industry where fake things became real. He finally couldn't stand it anymore. He immediately walked in and pulled Wei Wei Bai out of Qian's arms. Wei Wei Bai jumped in fright. When she looked up and saw that it was Lu Zishi, her eyes were full of smiles. "Brother." Her voice was sweet and seductive. It made Lu Zishi's heart tremble. And Qian also immediately called out, "Brother." Lu Zishi's face darkened. "Who are you calling brother?" And Qian immediately said cutely, "Whoever is Wei Wei's brother is my brother." Wei Wei Bai returned a smile. "Ah, Qian, do you lack a brother that much?" And Qian raised a super handsome smile. "I don't lack a brother, but I lack a sister." Lu, light bulb non-existent Ziyen. Fast transmigration system, Adonis, come here, /download the full article, https://www.sashu. Com download the full article, https://www.sashu. Com download the full article, https://sashu. Com//. Chapter 454. They were already flirting with each other. Were they going to roll around together next? He suddenly smiled, but his voice was as cold as the Siberian wind, chilling people to the core. "You don't have to come tomorrow. I think the role of the older brother in Dreamlike Blossoms doesn't suit you." And Qian stared blankly for a moment before realizing that the person in front of her was Lu Zishi. Although Lu Zishi had retired for a few years, who didn't know him? Not to mention, this movie was invested in by Tian Na Corporation, so he was indeed qualified to change roles. Xiao Yi had already rushed over. "Don't, big brother. I'm about to start shooting. Your last-minute change will kill me." Lu Zishi gloomily looked at him. "If I say change, then change. Otherwise, I'll withdraw my investment." Xiao Yi simply threw a tantrum. "Big brother's role isn't settled. The movie can't be filmed. If you withdraw your investment, I'll hang myself in front of your office." Lu Zishi, "Then don't film." He had invested several hundred million, and now he didn't film. If he had so much money, why didn't he burn it first? He could still use it after hanging himself. Suddenly, a small hand gently tugged at the corner of his clothes. Lu Zishi lowered his head. But all he saw was the top of Wei Wei Bai's head. She seemed a little nervous, her pink fingers clutching at the corner of his clothes. "Big brother. This movie is very good. Can't we film it?" Her voice was a little sad because her head was lowered, so he couldn't see her expression. She was so cautious, even her sadness was restrained. Lu Zishi's cold expression couldn't help but soften. "You like this movie?" Wei Wei Bai immediately raised her head, her eyes shining. Her small face without makeup was full of expectation. She nodded, and her ponytail swayed. She looked exceptionally soft and cute. Lu Zishi's mouth and brain seemed to be out of sync. The rational side of his brain clearly told himself very calmly that it was just a lousy movie. If he withdrew his investment, then so be it. But his mouth said first, "Then let's continue filming." The light in Wei Wei Bai's eyes turned into a smile. The corners of her mouth slightly curved, her delicate eyebrows moved with joy. "Thank you, big brother. You're the best." Her voice was soft and sweet, causing his eardrums to tremble. Moreover, her smile was especially bright and infectious, causing him to reveal a trace of a smile. Xiao Yi very tactlessly ran over and said, "Then if we don't withdraw our investment, can we continue filming?" The smile at the corner of Lu Zishi's mouth froze again. He raised his eyelids, and the coldness in his eyes was like a knife, stabbing at the little fresh meat next to him. And Qian was dumbfounded, as if he didn't know why he was being targeted. Lu Zishi thought about how if she was going to film, she would have to kiss, hug, and have sex scenes with this pretty boy in front of her, and also have a crush on him. A sour feeling welled up in his heart. He sneered, he's just a good-for-nothing with no strength. Can he act well? Xiao Yi, of course, why not? He's the best newcomer this year. Have you seen the XX movie? Have you seen the XX series? He's definitely capable. A trace of worship appeared on Wei Wei Bai's face, and she secretly glanced at Qian. The coldness in Lu Zishi's eyes deepened. Oh, it's just a little best newcomer award, and he dares to call himself capable. And Qian, who didn't say anything, obediently stood to the side. One was a director, the other was a film emperor and a boss. He didn't dare to speak. Xiao Yi nodded repeatedly. Of course. Didn't you win the Best Newcomer award in your first year? Chapter 455. Wei Wei Bai's sparkling eyes looked at him again. Lu Zishi felt both physically and mentally happy. He humphed faintly. It's just a newcomer award. I've won the Best Actor award 3 times. Yes, he won the Newcomer award in the first year, and the Best Actor award in the second year. Then he retired. He was simply a legend in the entertainment industry. Wei Wei Bai tilted her head, her face a little red. Suddenly, she said in a sweet voice, "Brother, you're so amazing." This sentence was so sweet that it could shatter his reason a little. He suddenly said, "It's just a so-so. Just like when you were rehearsing just now, that gigolo didn't act well enough. Whether it was his manners or his lines, they weren't good enough." Wei Wei Bai stared blankly at him with a soft and cute face. Worship and concentration. Lu Zishi felt that under this kind of gaze, he would even pluck the stars from the sky, not to mention acting as a commentator. He suddenly said, "You say the lines, we'll rehearse." Wei Wei Bai hesitated for a moment, then said in a soft voice, "Brother, you just came to see me." Lu Zishi's expression suddenly changed. The tranquility in his deep eyes suddenly shattered, and joy overflowed from his heart. The tips of his brows and the corners of his eyes were filled with the pure smile of seeing his beloved little sister. He suddenly bent down and neatly picked her up. Wei Wei Bai cried out in surprise. His lips moved to her ear and he whispered, "Hug my neck, just like you did in the rehearsal." Her ears were sensitive. His gentle breath brushed past, and her ears turned red. Lu Zishi's eyes darkened. She had already extended her lotus-like arms and gently placed them on his shoulders. He revealed a heroic smile and wantonly said, "Didn't I just finish winning the battle, so I rushed over to see you?" A young general, full of heroic spirit. At this moment, Lu Zishi's suit seemed to transform into the armor of an ancient general. His ability to immerse himself in the character and his charisma was astonishing. Wei Wei Bai also seemed to be in character. Her eyes held unsuppressible longing, sadness, and joy. All kinds of complicated emotions were entangled together. In the end, she buried her head in his chest and said in a muffled voice, "I don't want you to go to war. I only want Big Brother to be by my side, to love me, to protect me." This sentence did not seem to be an act. But it seemed like she was revealing her true feelings. She even repeated in a low voice, "I only want Big Brother by my side." He suddenly remembered that when she was being abused, there was a time when she had drawn a picture of an older brother to accompany her. As if that would be the only way to protect her. She was spared the horrible torture. Although he had lost his mother during his childhood, his entire family revolved around him. He lived a life of luxury and insufferably arrogance. She, on the other hand, had been abused. She didn't eat or drink and had to be hospitalized several times because of serious injuries. Lu Zishi suddenly felt that she had so easily recognized him as her brother. Was it because she was already in despair that any random person would save her? She would resign herself to her fate and follow him, calling him brother. Thinking of this, Lu Zishi couldn't help but hug her even more tightly. His eyes glared fiercely at the two men present. The innocent-looking Qian and Xiao Yi felt a chill run down their backs. They felt like Lu Zishi was going to eat them. Then he walked out with Wei Wei Bai in his arms. Xiao Yi anxiously said, then the role of big brother. Lu Zishi's footsteps paused. He turned around with a smile that wasn't a smile. I'll play it. How could he not see through Xiao Yi's provocation? Chapter 456. And Qian's appearance wasn't suitable for the role of a brother. Because he had to invest, he had read the script. And Qian's gigolo was more like the last emperor in the drama. If he guessed correctly, Xiao Yi had deliberately led him to watch this play. It was to make him have no choice but to go into battle himself, so that his sister wouldn't be kissed and have a bed seen by a strange wretched man. He knew it was a trap. He looked down and saw her leaning on his chest, her lips curved sweetly as if she was very happy. The depression in his heart from being schemed against dissipated. Forget it, a trap is a trap. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 45. The cast of Dreamlike Blossoms announced that Qian would play the last emperor, Chu Xianping. Fans, looking forward to it, the best newcomer. He has looks, strength, and his own popularity. Wei Wei Bai played the great general's sister, Yan Qiqi. Fans, green tea sister. Although she looks good, is she good at acting? She can't be an idiot, right? Lu Zishi played the young general, Yan Yi. The fans were collectively silent for 3 seconds, then exploded. God, my husband is coming back. Someone stab me and let me know that this isn't a dream. Brother Lu, I love you, I love you. I've been a fan since you debuted. You're this era's superstar. You're our star. Because of the news of Lu Zishi's comeback. On the contrary, Bai Weiwei was suppressed, and no one discussed it. Occasionally, a few small fans would weakly say a few words in the vast number of Lu Zishi fans' comments. I think the green tea sister is very cute. Wei Wei Bai saw this comment on her phone and silently liked it. Yes, she also felt that she was very cute. Wei Wei, put on your makeup. We're going to shoot the official photo. The makeup artist ran over. Wei Wei Bai smiled and nodded, then went to put on her makeup. Lu Zishi had something to do today and would be late. So Wei Wei Bai shot first. And Qian had already put on the emperor's clothes. It was a thick black, and he had a crown on his head. His face was a little pale, and his eyes were a little gloomy. It was in line with his status as the last emperor. Lu Zishi got out of the car and hurried over. Because he had taken over Yan Ye's role at the last minute, he could only deal with all the company's matters at once. Only then would he be able to join the crew. As soon as he stepped into the studio, he saw everyone huddled together. A trace of displeasure flashed through Lu Zishi's eyes. Why didn't this crew have any sense of professionalism? He pushed a few people aside and heard a song. Her voice was faintly discernible and sweet. It was so mysterious that it seeped into one's heart. Lu Zishi looked up and saw a petite figure. She was wearing a red tulle dress, a simple and unadorned cyan jade pendant, and thick black hair draped over her shoulders. She stretched out her bare feet, her toes sparkling like jade, and stepped on the big red drum. Her figure was as graceful as the clouds, and her face was as beautiful as a flower. Her soft and beautiful fingers held a bright red peach blossom as she softly sang an ancient tune. In accordance with the photographer's request, she gently revealed a smile that seemed to be joyful, but also had a hurt look in her eyes. It was so breathtaking that people couldn't breathe. The photographer in charge of the shoot smoothly and satisfactorily finished taking the official photo. He said to Wei Wei Bai, "You can end it now." "Very good." His words awakened the people at the scene. Just now, when Wei Wei Bai was dancing in that dress, that magic was simply impossible to break free from. Now, they could finally breathe. Chapter 458. No, it felt that its host was so black-hearted and rotten that no medicine could save her. The male lead should pray for his own good fortune. After Lu Zishi finished eating, he said to her, "Let's go back." Wei Wei Bai smiled and nodded. "And, big brother." The word big brother was sweet to the heart. Lu Zishi couldn't help but smile. He put aside his disgust for her and looked at her clearly. He realized that having a little sister wasn't bad. When they left the studio, the road was full of potholes and puddles. It had rained heavily in the afternoon, and they hadn't expected to accumulate so much sewage. Lu Zishi looked at Wei Wei Bai's little white shoes. She seemed to be in a dilemma as she stopped in her tracks. She hesitated for a few seconds before deciding to take a step forward. He suddenly walked in front of her and bent his knees. He turned back and said to her, "Come up, I'll carry you." Wei Wei Bai hesitated, somewhat at a loss. Lu Zishi said indifferently and forcefully, "Come up." Wei Wei Bai smiled somewhat bashfully. Then, she put her hand on his shoulder and pressed her body against his back. The road was very quiet. They had to walk through a long street before they could find a parking space. As she lay on his back, her slender fingers accidentally rubbed against his neck. His muscles tightened, but he didn't say anything and continued to walk. Wei Wei Bai indifferently leaned closer, her breath gently brushing against his ear. This was a sensitive spot. Lu Zishi's footsteps paused. An unbearable numbness appeared in waves from her careless breath. Lu Zishi's ears began to turn red. His jaw tightened, and his lips were tightly pursed. Wei Wei Bai seemed to be careless again. Her head softly rested on his shoulder, and her lips gently kissed the skin of his neck. A faint red color began to appear on his skin. There was a type of person whose body temperature could be seen. That was a man like Lu Zishi, whose skin would turn red when he was excited. Wei Wei Bai silently revealed a mischievous smile. She suddenly whispered, "Big brother, I'm sleepy." Her voice was soft, clingy, and hoarse with a trace of exhaustion. She was pure and innocent, with a seductive charm that seduced people. Lu Zishi's breathing began to grow heavy. His face was red, and his black pupils were frighteningly bright. His breath undulated as he said, "Go to sleep. I'll wake you up when we arrive." Wei Wei Bai nodded sleepily and then closed her eyes quietly, her lips touching his neck. His long hair also fell on his shoulders and touched his cheeks. All of his senses were enveloped by her soft body and sweet fragrance. She did not resist at all. She seemed to completely believe that he was a good brother and would not do anything to her. Lu Zishi didn't even know how he walked through this long street. He felt as if his body was boiling. When he put her in the passenger seat, she was already fast asleep. Lu Zishi fastened her seatbelt. Just as he was about to start the car, he suddenly gasped for breath. His eyes were terrifyingly dark. In the depths of his eyes, there was a kind of dark and unknown heat that was rolling around. Finally, as if he had accepted his fate, he raised his head. He looked back at her and saw that she was leaning against the seat with her head tilted. Her face was fair and delicate, suffused with red. She looked exceptionally delicious. He stared unwaveringly at her pink lips. His fingers gently fell on her lips. His fingertips felt the softness of her lips. She seemed to be somewhat aware, and her lips trembled. He immediately didn't dare to move. Suddenly, her tongue stuck out and licked her lower lip. It also wet and hot licked his fingertips. Chapter 460. Lu Zishi walked out of the bathroom and saw her sleeping on her side. Her beautiful silhouette was faintly discernible under the light. He took a deep breath and then walked out. The housekeeper walked over. "Young master, do you have any orders?" Lu Zishi shook his head. "I'll sleep in the guest room." The housekeeper hesitated and was about to say something. Lu Zishi took a step forward and went to sleep in the guest room. But 2 hours later, in the middle of the night, Lu Zishi returned to his room with 2 dark circles under his eyes and a cold expression on his face. He recognized the bed. The guest room's bed smelled wrong, the quilt was wrong, and the mattress was wrong. Most importantly, he was used to Wei Wei Bai's unique soft fragrance surrounding him. It was like being poisoned. Lu Zishi lay on the bed. She slept on her side and didn't lean over. He crossed his arms behind his head and looked sideways at her slender back. She was still too thin. Although she looked good on camera, she was light in his arms and didn't have the slightest weight. It was healthy to eat more. He looked, and his body began to heat up again. But he couldn't bear to move his body and go to the guest room. It was boiling here, and so was the guest room. But here, Lu Zishi took a deep breath. The bedding was filled with her faint, soft, sweet scent. And the guest room was empty and cold. It was the same insomnia, but he still chose to sleep here. Afraid that he would become a beast, Lu Zishi had to take out his phone to distract himself. He glanced at his friend circle. There were still people leaving him messages asking to see his sister. He snorted and blacklisted them. In such a short time, he had blacklisted almost half of his friend circle. Those who dared to covet his sister were all trash. He didn't make friends with trash. After blacklisting a few people, he logged out and went to Weibo. Even though it was late at night, Weibo was still in a frenzy. The first trending topic was the official release of Dreamlike Blossoms. It was unknown how many times more popular it was than the second post. The super director Xiao Yi. The genius film emperor who had made a comeback. And the super popular new star in Qian. They were all trending topic bombs. Under the official account of Dreamlike Blossoms, it was as lively as the new year. Lu Zishi was used to such things. He glanced at the comments on the official Weibo in boredom. At first, it was very normal. Most of them were happy that he was willing to come back and make a movie. But gradually, the comments started to feel weird. Don't you think Qian and Green Tea Sister are a perfect match? They are indeed a good match. I thought that Green Tea Sister didn't have any acting skills, but after looking at the official poster, I feel that she's really good. Lu Zishi scrolled up the page with a dark expression and saw that the latest official photo was of Qian and Wei Wei Bai together. On the huge red drum, Wei Wei Bai was wearing a red dress and white clothes. She was holding a peach blossom in her long and slender fingers. She looked at the emperor below the drum with a sweet smile. And Qian was dressed in a black robe and her hair was combed into a bun. The pale and frail emperor lay beside the drum with deep emotions in her eyes. A huge impact of black, red, and white. It felt like an oil painting. Indeed, they were a match made in heaven. The temperature in Lu Zishi's eyes dropped, and he emitted traces of cold air. He put away his phone and felt the liver fire in his body become more and more exuberant. She suddenly turned over, and her long hair fell softly on his arm. Lu Zixi body stiffened. He felt that she was already within reach. Her soft breaths brushed against his ear. He should push her away. But when his fingers were halfway, her slender and fair calf rested on his lap. The touch of her smooth skin simply made one's mind ripple. Lu Zixi didn't dare to move at all. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the button at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 462. Yes, he'd come today just to take her to eat. And to go shopping. He'd consulted his scoundrel friends, and they'd said that all girls liked this. Wei Wei Bai immediately smiled sweetly. Okay, big brother. Xiao Yi's face was full of shit. What the hell? What did she mean by casually acting? Hundreds of millions of investment was his, great director Zhao's, signature. Which actor would dare to casually act? He'd whip her to death. Lu Zixi seemed to sense something and looked at Xiao Yi. His gaze turned from soft to icy murderous in less than a second. Do you have any objections? Xiao Yi smiled flatteringly. No, no, how could I dare to have any objections? Then he turned his head and cried. Was there any justice? He was the director, okay. After the set was ready, they began to shoot the first encounter scene. And Qian quickly got into character. His posture was graceful, and because of the makeup, his face was weak and pale. And Qian's acting skills were still there. His every move was very elegant and noble as he stepped into the peach blossom forest. The scene was Wei Wei Bai falling from a tree into his arms. The tree wasn't tall. Wei Wei Bai sat on a branch and softly sang an ancient tune. She wore light peach embroidered shoes, which gently swayed as she stepped on the flowers. Lu Zixi looked at the camera lens and saw her sweet smile. It was like her nature was acting. She was usually so pure and innocent. Lu Zixi was a little worried about the tragic changes she would have to act out later. Suddenly, she fell from the tree. Without anyone's help, she fell. Lu Zixi suddenly stood up, his heart in his throat. And Qian looked up in surprise and immediately reached out to catch her. It was soft and fragrant, as if he was hugging a ball of glutinous rice cake. Wei Wei Bai took the opportunity to reach out and pull down his head. Then she raised her face, and the two of them formed an illusion of kissing. She'd studied this position. On the other side of the camera, the two of them were carelessly kissing. But in reality, the two of them hadn't touched each other. Lu Zixi's eyes abruptly sank, and he stared at them with a frighteningly dark gaze. His fingers gripped the armrest of the chair fiercely as his anger boiled up. They did not stop acting because of this accident. And Qian didn't realize that the two of them seemed to be kissing. Instead, he went along with the plot and teased, "Where did this little girl come from? She can't wait to fly into my arms." Wei Wei Bai also took the opportunity to move away, revealing her extremely bashful face. Her watery eyes glistened with curiosity. She looked at him with fear and shyness. "Put me down." And Qian laughed out loud. "No, you fell into my arms on your own accord, so you're mine." Wei Wei Bai was anxious. With a red face, she reached out her fist and lightly punched him. "Who's you? You have such a big face. Put me down." Wait a minute, was there such a bashful scene in the script? And Qian was also addicted to acting. He displayed the temperament of a profligate son to the extreme. He immediately reached out and lifted her chin. "This world is Zhen's, and so are you. At these words, Wei Wei Bai's face appropriately paled. She pushed him away, turned around, and ran. But because her skirt was too long, she stepped on it and fell into Qian's arms. The two of them rolled into a bowl. And Qian groaned. He knew that this accident would probably cut it. So, he didn't continue acting. Instead, he sincerely joked, "You're so heavy. Do you want to crush me to death so that you can inherit my position as a superstar?" Wei Wei Bai lay on his chest, lifted her slightly red face, and laughed happily. "Yeah, how did you know?"